Chapter 275. Originally, she had only wanted to help Su Yojin put in a few good words to strengthen her position in the emperor's heart. She had not expected to receive such a promise. Ning was overjoyed. With this news, getting a few 100,000 taels of silver from Su Yojin shouldn't be a problem. Delighted, Ning respectfully replied, "This subject will pass on your Majesty's words to Lord Su. I'm sure that he will shed tears of gratitude and will wholeheartedly work for your Majesty in the future." Haha, good. Zhu Qiu also laughed heartily, but in his heart, he was somewhat looking forward to the next two things. He wanted to see what would happen when the two grandsons of the minister fought. He wanted to see what the Japanese would do. He also wanted to see what kind of wonderful performance Su Yojin would have. The Wang residence. As the current Minister of Personnel, he was in charge of the promotion and evaluation of officials. Wang Zhi's residence had a majestic aura, but at this moment in his study, Minister Wang's expression was rather unsightly. This was especially so when an official came to report that his most favored grandson, Wang Si, was currently suffering from hunger and cold in a dungeon. He was so angry that his beard trembled. As the Minister of Personnel for many years, he had personally promoted countless officials. If one were to say that it wasn't because of one's personal preference, no one would believe it, even if one were to say it. It was precisely because of this that, in the past few years, very few people in the capital had been able to escape his eyes and ears. There would always be some officials who would reveal information to him in the name of repaying a debt of gratitude, and this included people from all sorts of departments. Just as his grandson had started fighting with Yu Shiyue's grandson, the news had arrived. Wang Zhi did not care at first when this matter came out. It was just a child's quarrel. They would each be given 50 strikes and sent back to their respective residences to manage. At the very least, if he were the one in charge, this would definitely be the case. After all, he was the Minister of Personnel, and Yu Shiyue was the Minister of Punishments. They were both officials of the court and would see each other frequently. It was impossible for them to fall out over the matter of a child. But reality did not develop as he had expected. From the reports of the officials, Yu Yuanbi had gone to the hospital in the name of recuperating and was very comfortable. His grandson was locked up in a cold and damp dungeon. How could Wang Zhi not be angered by such an obvious way of dealing with the situation? However, due to his identity, it wasn't convenient for Wang Zhi to interfere. He could only watch the performance of the officials from the Ministry of Justice from afar. Fortunately, Yang Qindong soon made a move, which made Minister Wang feel relieved. Wang Si didn't acknowledge the wrong teacher. Although this gentleman's actual age was younger than his grandson's, it was still true that the one who reached the top was the teacher. He had thought that since Yang Qindong had made a move, his grandson would be fine. However, the result was not like this. On the contrary, this loyal duke of the great Ming dynasty took a different approach and sent a complaint to the Ministry of Justice, Li Wenxiao, who had distorted the facts. At first, Wang Zhi was puzzled by this outcome. However, after thinking about it carefully, he couldn't help but clap his hands in praise. This loyal duke was clearly going to use a ruthless method to cure Wang Si. Yes, with Yang Qindong's identity, he could naturally ask the Ministry of Justice for Wang Si. He could simply bail Wang Si out of the dungeon. However, if he did this, he would be at a disadvantage. Others would say that this was the result of suppressing people with power and couldn't truly convince the public. On the other hand, if he didn't mention Wang Si's matter and let him suffer a little, he would target the official in charge, Li Wenxiao. In this way, if he really overthrew Li Wenxiao, who would dare to deal with people and matters related to the loyal duke out of selfishness in the future, it was just letting his grandson suffer for a day or two more, but it would fundamentally prevent such things from happening. No matter how he looked at it, it was worth it. Even if Wang Si was his favorite grandson, Wang Zhi still supported Yang Qindong's decision. Perhaps this was the difference in the structure. As the minister of a ministry, he didn't look at the small profits in front of him, but the long term. Ah, I just don't know if the Loyalty Duke's paper can overturn Li Wenxiao's case. No, I have to lend a helping hand. I also have to let others know that those who dare to bully my grandson, Wang Ji, should be prepared to be dealt with. Wang Ji muttered to himself. Then he called out to the outside men. In the Ministry of Justice's court. Although Li Wenxiao was still wearing his official robes, his face was pale, even though the weather outside wasn't hot at all, and it was a bit cold in the morning and evening. Beads of sweat flowed down from his forehead, splattering on the ground. Li Wenxiao, there are people suing you for corruption, accepting bribes, and creating many unjust, false, and wrong cases. You have to give an explanation. Su Yojin sat high up in the court. As she spoke, she casually threw the paper in front of Li Wenxiao. From the moment he was brought to this torture court, Li Wenxiao had a bad feeling, especially when he found out that Assistant Minister Su had personally gone to Minister Yu Shiyue's residence and still made such a decision. He knew that he had been abandoned, and that the matter would be difficult to resolve. The paper had been personally sent by the Loyalty Duke, who was at the peak of his power. The lawsuit had also been approved by his superior, Minister of Justice Yu Shiyue. The person in charge of his trial was the second in command of the Ministry of Justice, Left Assistant Minister Su Yojin. With such a weighty list before him, if he still held on to any hope, wouldn't he be deceiving himself and others? Wasn't this enough to wake him up and frighten him? When the paper floated in front of him and he looked at the details written on it, his sweat dripped down even faster. He had done many of these things very secretly. He didn't know why they were still dug up. However, after reading the complaint, he felt much more at ease. There was no other reason other than the fact that the things recorded on the paper were all recent, and the amount of corruption wasn't that huge. From the looks of it, it wasn't enough to smash him to death with a hammer. At most, he would be dismissed from his position. If things went well, he might even be able to keep his position as an official and rise again in the future. It was precisely because he saw these papers that Li Wenxiao was not as afraid as before. When he raised his head to look at the presiding judge, Su Yojin, he actually had an honest expression as he said, "Lord Su, this official has indeed done some foolish things. After the incident, I deeply regret it. Please take into account this official's honest answers and cooperation, and forgive me." "Oh, so you've admitted to it?" Originally, Su Yojin had been waiting to see Li Wenxiao cry out that he had been wronged. Then he would show his swift and decisive side and let everyone see how the newly appointed left assistant minister dealt with the case and how ruthless his methods were. Of course, all of this was based on his trust in Yang Qindong. He knew that since this person had taken out these papers in front of everyone, he had to have enough evidence. But he never thought that Li Wenxiao would not only admit to everything, but also have such a positive attitude. This made him feel like he had punched cotton. A police officer's achievement was to find the culprit through clues. A judge's achievement was to use enough evidence to make the defendant admit to his crimes. However, if all the prisoners were to confess before he could do anything, then there would be no sense of accomplishment. At this moment, Su Yojin felt this way. He had already seen the papers. If Li Wenxiao denied everything, then he could produce enough evidence to prove that he was right. He could also add a heavy punishment based on the other party's uncooperative behavior. On the other hand, if the other party admitted to everything and had a good attitude, then based on this, it would be much more difficult to do anything to him. If Yu Shiyue sincerely protected him, then it was possible that he would be able to keep his position as an official. At this moment, Su Yojin was a little disappointed. He even had a trace of doubt about Yang Qindong's ability. If the dignified Duke of Loyalty wanted to deal with someone, he shouldn't only produce this little bit of evidence. If that was the case, then it would be difficult for him. But he didn't think about it. Yang Qindong's security bureau had only been established for a short period of time, and there were so many officials to keep an eye on. A fifth-rank official in the Ministry of Justice was not the most important thing. To be able to find out about this, he had already put in a lot of effort. It was not impossible to find out about the past, but to do it in a short period of time would be very difficult. But he still did it, which was somewhat thought-provoking. Could it be that he was sure that there would be others who would do it? Li Wenxiao's cooperative behavior made it difficult for Su Yozhen, but on the surface he still nodded with praise. Very good. Your attitude is very cooperative. This official will record all of this. As for how to deal with it in the end, I still need to discuss with a few officials before the final decision can be made. For now, leave. Before the word hall could be said, a small official from the Ministry of Justice came to Su Yozhen's side and whispered a few words in his ear. At the same time, he took out a stack of papers from his sleeve and placed it on the table. Then he slowly retreated. Su Yozhen's gaze fell on the table in front of him and looked at the densely written papers. When he raised his head to look at Li Wenxiao, who was standing below the stage, he couldn't help but shake his head. Then he said, "Come, strip him of his official robes." Li Wenxiao, who was originally waiting to leave, suddenly saw Su Yozhen's attitude change. At the same time, his heart was beating like a drum as he shouted, "Official Su, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why? Seeing that you and I are colleagues, you can see for yourself." Su Yozhen pushed his hand on the table, and the thick papers fluttered in the air. When they landed on Li Wenxiao's feet, he lowered his head and looked up. Then he fell to the ground. Chapter 276. The contents of these papers were exactly what he had done a few years ago when he had just become an official. Perhaps it was because he had just entered the court, but his courage was still relatively big. He really dared to accept any kind of money and dared to do anything. Among them, he was even involved in 2 murder cases. At that time, it was precisely because he had accepted these bribes that he was able to give the money to his superiors and get promoted. He originally thought that after so many years, everyone would definitely not remember these things, but now they were all dug up. If he dared to admit it, not to mention his official position, it would be extremely difficult to keep his life. No, these things were not done by me. It has nothing to do with me. Seeing that he might die if he admitted it, Li Wenxiao, of course, would not let go. Li Wenxiao's expression finally changed, which also made Su Yozhen interested. These were all sent by the Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji, so there was no need to doubt the authenticity of these documents. In the face of ironclad evidence, Li Wenxiao still dared to deny it. It was finally time for Su Yozhen to show his skills. What? You don't want to admit it? Well then, we will interrogate you one by one. Come, prepare the torture equipment. Su Yozhen's angry voice resounded throughout the entire torture chamber. Although it was said that there was no need to torture a doctor, seeing that Li Wenxiao was about to die, Su Yozhen would not be polite. He was still waiting to use this case to gain a foothold in the Ministry of Justice. On the road to Yangqindong, the convoy was caught by the Security Bureau. Then Tiger's Mane told Yang Qindong in the carriage that Minister Wang Ji had taken action and obtained a large amount of evidence of Li Wenxiao's violation of the law. Young Master, Minister Wang has taken action, and the Ministry of Justice has also released Wang Si. At this time, he is heading towards the Wang mansion. Tiger's Mane's voice clearly came out and entered the ears of Yang Qindong, who was sitting in the carriage with his eyes closed. I know. Yang Qindong answered very simply. Since Wang Ji had understood his intentions and had already made his move, then with the power of Wang Ji, the evidence he had gathered should be enough to keep an eye on Li Wenxiao. There was nothing for him to worry about. Previously, Yang Qindong knew that the information obtained from the Security Bureau was limited. He was afraid that he would not be able to kill Li Wenxiao with one blow. However, he still did it because he believed that Wang Ji would definitely take action after knowing what he had done. If he couldn't even see it, he wouldn't have been able to stay in the position of Minister of Personnel for more than 10 years. Since Wang Ji had made his move, Li Wenxiao would definitely die. This matter could be put aside for the time being. Some things needed to ferment for a period of time before they could be dealt with. Thinking about it, that way, they would be able to reap greater rewards. Tiger's Mane, in the name of this young master, quickly informed Commander Gao Xiong that he can take action. Understood, young master. Tiger's Mane replied and rode away. Leaving Yang Qindong alone in the carriage, he muttered to himself, "Since you can't see the faces of some people clearly, then I'll give you a lesson." After experiencing inhumane treatment, Li Wenxiao also enjoyed many of the torture instruments that he was already familiar with. In the end, he spat out and confessed to many of the things written on the confession paper. When Su Yozhen received Li Wenxiao's confession, it was already the morning of the second day. Although he didn't sleep much this night, it seemed that everything was worth it to be able to achieve such a result. Of course, what made Su Yozhen even more excited was that after a night of torture, Li Wenxiao's psychological defenses had completely collapsed. He really said whatever he wanted to say, and in the end he even accused many people, including the matter of him sending money to Minister of Justice Yu Shiyue. It added up to more than 20,000 taels of silver. According to the law of the Ming dynasty, which was the rule set by Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang, if an official embezzled 60 taels of silver, he would be punished. One could imagine what the consequences of 20,000 taels of silver would be. This was equivalent to a huge bomb. Although Su Yozhen was a little excited, he didn't lose his head. After thinking it over, he didn't directly report it in an official document. Instead, he secretly told Ji Ning the matter. At the same time, he also had someone tell the secret agents of the Security Bureau to tell the Duke of Loyalty and Courage what he had done. Yang Qindong learned of Su Yozhen's gains and his choice at noon the next day. In the study, after Tiger's Mane reported Su Yozhen's actions, he tried to say, "Young master, why didn't Sir Su report this to the court? Why didn't he ask for permission before doing this? Should we give him a warning?" The warning Tiger's Mane spoke of was naturally to give Su Yozhen a good beating. This person had relied on the young master's help to get to where he was today. Now that he had a bit of power and merit, he dared to act first and report later. This trend could not be allowed to continue. He did the right thing. Faced with Tiger's Mane's advice, Yang Qindong smiled and shook his head. Sir Su told Ji Ning the news as soon as possible. That was the right thing to do. If it was delayed, it wouldn't be good. All right, let him handle this matter. The reason Yang Qindong trusted Su Yozhen so much and didn't blame him at all was because he had his own thoughts. Su Yozhen was one of the most powerful officials in history. Although his reputation wasn't good, his political skills and foresight were unquestionable. Since he had done this, he naturally had his own reasons. Furthermore, Yang Qindong could see that Su Yozhen had just entered the Ministry of Justice. If he removed Yu Shiyue now, based on his qualifications, he might not be able to take the position of minister. If he couldn't achieve this goal, then what good would it do to expose this matter? Rather than not being able to kill someone with one strike, it was better to wait a little longer and hang the blade high up. This could produce unexpected results. Moreover, once this matter was out, Yu Shiyue and the people behind him should be the ones having a headache. He only needed to wait and see how the other party would react. Yang Qindong understood Su Yozhen's actions. In the palace, after Ji Ning received Su Yozhen, she was full of praise for his actions and methods. Good, very good. Sir Su, you did well. How about this? I will report this matter to the emperor. As for the specifics, you can go back and listen to the letter. She held Li Wenxiao's confession in her hand. Although Ji Ning was angry, she was still very happy that Su Yozhen had reported to her first. This official will take his leave. Su Yozhen also knew that Ji Ning probably had a lot of things to do now. He didn't stay any longer and even gave up the opportunity to flatter her alone. He left decisively. After Su Yozhen left, Ji Ning thought for a moment and then went straight to Zhu Qiyu's office hall. Zhu Qiyu was still a part-time emperor. At least he was very diligent. Most of his time was spent dealing with political matters. When he saw Jin Ing appear in front of him with a serious expression, he instinctively felt that something was wrong. He asked, "Beloved official Jin, did something happen?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Just now, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice came and gave me these." As she spoke, Jin Ing respectfully presented the confession she had just received to Zhu Qiyu. Then she explained, "This is Li Wenxiao's confession. If everything is true, I'm afraid that Sir Yu Shuriwa will no longer be able to hold the position of Minister of Justice." "It's that serious?" Zhu Qiyu, who was flipping through the confession, heard this and his eyes widened. "Yes, it's that serious. It's because of this that Su Yozhin didn't say it publicly in court. Instead, he found me in private and told me this. Your Majesty, you see." Jining nodded and spoke very seriously. "Yu Shuriwa can't be touched now." Zhu Qiyu shook his head decisively. His expression was very resolute. This was basically what Jining had expected. Yu Shuriwa could continue to hold the position of Minister of Justice because he had gained Zhu Qiyu's trust. Although the current situation seemed to be much more stable, the external threat had not been completely eliminated. Before this, it was basically impossible to make the hearts of the people calm down. Thus, it was time to display the wisdom of the Dai Zong Emperor by choosing the type of officials and appointing the type of officials. Yu Shuriwa was one of the officials who supported Zhu Qiyu's camp. If such a person was to be taken down, one could imagine how the hearts of the others would waver. Not to mention, this was not long after Yang Qindong had a conflict with him. If he were to be taken down, it would only increase the prestige of the Duke of Loyalty. From then on, there would be very few people who would dare to go against Yang Qindong. If this were to happen, it would undoubtedly be a huge blow to the emperor's authority. Zhu Qiyu, who was gathering imperial power and preparing to make a big show of it, would definitely not allow such a thing to happen. "Yes, you can't touch him." Jin Ing hurriedly repeated from the side. "How long can Su Yozhin keep this matter under wraps?" Although Zhu Qiyu did not want to touch Yu Shuriwa, he knew that since the matter had already happened and was being watched by two important officials, Yang Qindong and Wang Ji, it was obviously impossible to pretend that nothing had happened. As the emperor, although he had many privileges, he still had to be fair. If he was too biased towards one side, not only would it not convince the public, it would also cause trouble. This, it's hard to say. Unless something big happens, I'm afraid that many people are keeping an eye on this case. Jining had a troubled expression on her face. He also knew that it was not the right time to touch Yu Shuriwa. However, whether it was Yang Qindong or Wang Ji, who had provided evidence later, which one of them was easy to deal with? Jining's answer allowed Zhu Qiyu to see a glimmer of hope. "Very good. Then come up with something else to attract everyone's attention. Didn't the Duke of Loyalty beat up the Japanese envoys yesterday? Because of this, there were even censors who wrote impeachment memorials, but I suppressed them all. Now, contact more censors and have them impeach the Duke of Loyalty and divert everyone's attention. Also, privately inform Yu Shuriwa. He will know how to suppress this matter." Chapter 277. With Yu Shuriwa's status as the Minister of the Ministry of Justice, even if Li Wenxiao's case was handled by the Ministry of Justice, he should know how to minimize the impact and extricate himself from it without needing anyone to tell him what to do. As long as Li Wenxiao went back on his words and refused to admit to what he had said about Yu Shuriwa, the matter could be reduced to a small matter. At the very least, the Minister of Justice could be saved. Your Majesty is wise. Jining hadn't thought of a better idea, but when she heard Zhu Qiyu's suggestion, her eyes immediately lit up. Previously, Zhu Qiyu didn't want to touch Yang Qindong because he wanted to see how the Japanese envoy would react before making a decision. However, now that Yu Shuriwa's incident had happened, all of his plans were about to be disrupted. Using this matter to divert everyone's attention was a feasible move. "Very good. Official Jin, go ahead and do it. You can contact more people and say that it's our will." Zhu Qiyu rubbed his forehead with a pained expression. Using officials to deal with officials was one of the most common tactics used by the imperial power. After all, there were only so many people at the top. If one wanted to rise to the top, not only did they need to have ability and intelligence, they also needed to have good opportunities and a good position. This was the fundamental reason why other officials were willing to lay their hands on their colleagues. Only when others fell would you have a chance to rise to the top, right? However, Zhu Qiyu didn't know that it was too early to use the imperial censor to touch Yang Qindong. On the contrary, it was equivalent to doing him a great favor. After obtaining Zhu Qiyu's permission, Jin Ying left excitedly. She quickly found the Minister of Revenue Jin Lian, the Minister of War Yi Ming, the Minister of Works Shi Pu, and the Marquis of Wuqing Shiheng. After they learned of the Emperor's intentions, they each used their own power to have the officials who listened to them write impeachment memorials. The busiest of them all was the imperial censor of the right, Chen Yi. With the position of imperial censor of the left vacant, Chen Yi naturally became the head of the imperial censor. He managed the specific matters of the imperial censor's memorials. That very afternoon, more than 70% of the imperial censors submitted memorials to the throne. They were all talking about the same thing. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage had destroyed the Japanese diplomatic mission's encampment, tore down the courtyard door, and whipped the envoy. The imperial censors unanimously agreed that the great Ming dynasty was a great country and should have an incomparably broad mind and magnanimity. Using force to suppress the envoys of other countries like this was really unacceptable. It was a loss of face for the great Ming dynasty and should be severely punished. With so many imperial censors participating at the same time, the news quickly spread to the ears of all the ministers. In the Hu estate, as Yang Qindong's father-in-law, Hu Zhongning immediately went to his father's study when he heard the news. There he met with the Minister of Rights, Hu Shao. Hu Shao naturally knew what his son meant by rashly barging in. "You're already so old, yet you're still so rash. Don't you know what it means to act when something big happens?" "Yes, father. I was wrong, but with so many people impeaching Qindong, I'm really worried that something bad will happen." Hu Zhongning first admitted his mistake, then expressed his worries in one breath. He was both satisfied and apprehensive that his daughter had married Yang Qindong. He was satisfied because there were no outstanding young talents like Yang Qindong. It was indeed a great blessing for his daughter to be able to marry him. However, at the same time, it was precisely because Yang Qindong was too young and his contributions were too great that this father-in-law had always been worried about him. It was said that the tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. However, why didn't his son-in-law know how to restrain himself? Wasn't it good for him to obediently stay in the Yang family manor with money and power? Why did he have to come out and cause trouble and stick his foot in everything? Now he was so daring that he even dared to hit the envoys of other countries. It was no wonder that the imperial censors would jointly impeach him. What will happen? Do you think that your son-in-law is you? Don't you use your brain when something happens? Don't you have any composure? Hu Shao said calmly. He held the position of minister and had been an official for many years. As an old court official, he had long been used to big storms and big waves. He could see through the matter in front of him at a glance. Why didn't anyone say anything about what happened yesterday during the morning assembly? Why did it take an entire day for there to be any movement? If someone said that there was no problem at all, he wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. Thinking about it, there was also news that Su Youjin's interrogation of Li Wenxiao had yielded results. Hu Shao figured everything out. This was clearly a diversion method, and the target could only be Yang Qindong. Since it was a diversion method, there was no clear target. If that was the case, what was there to worry about? It was nothing more than when the matter blew up, Yang Qindong would stand out and apologize, and the matter would be settled. Of course, it wasn't that there wasn't any worry. That was whether this grandson-in-law, Yang Qindong, would be able to lower his noble head when he was young and successful. That was what he was worried about. That's enough. This time, Qindong was only implicated. If you're worried, go to the Yang village and tell him that it was me who said that he should lower his head when he should. It's not a big deal, and he won't lose a piece of meat. Hu Shao felt that he still needed to remind Yang Qindong, so he gave the task to his son. Oh, I understand, father. Although Hu Zhongning didn't understand what was going on, he didn't say much. But since he had said so, it shouldn't be a big deal. So, after agreeing, he prepared his horse and went straight to the Yang village. In the study of the Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji, who was sitting there, let out a long sigh. With his connections, he already knew that Li Wenxiao had admitted to everything and even exposed Shangguan Yushiyue. Following that, he heard that the imperial censors had jointly impeached Yang Qindong. Regarding this, he made a difficult choice. This matter was clearly caused by his grandson, Wang Si. Logically speaking, he should be on Yang Qindong's side. Faced with the imperial censor's impeachment, he only needed to expose Li Wenxiao's matter during the morning court session tomorrow. He believed that everyone's attention would quickly be diverted. That way, the Duke of Loyalty should be fine. However, he would have to face the Emperor's dissatisfaction, and even Yu Shiyue's faction would target him. If he angered the Emperor, he would be walking on thin ice when doing things in the future. If he wasn't careful, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. On the other hand, if he didn't do anything for his own position, Yang Qindong would be in a lot of trouble. At the very least, he had to publicly apologize. Afterwards, he would have to face the punishment of the acting emperor. As for how far he would go, he couldn't guess. One was doing nothing for his own sake, while the other was putting himself in danger for the sake of returning a favor. At this moment, Wang Ji really didn't know what to do. The world was bustling with activity for profit, and the world was bustling with activity for profit. Wang Ji had been an official for many years. Naturally, he understood the principle of putting himself out of harm's way. However, it wasn't as if he didn't know how to repay kindness. In the end, he made a painful decision. That was, he informed all the imperial censors, who were on good terms with him, to quietly observe the situation and not participate in this matter. However, at the same time, he didn't reveal that he had evidence against Li Wenxiao and that Li Wenxiao had accused Yu Shiyue. In short, he didn't help either side and had no intention of participating in this matter. Not helping either side was, in fact, helping Yang Qindong. After all, compared to the imperial power and the four great ministers, it was very rare for Wang Ji to be neutral. When Yang Qindong learned of Wang Ji's performance, he nodded in satisfaction in his bedroom. This was a good start. If he continued to maintain this, he was confident that one day this minister of personnel would be of use to him. As for the impeachment of the imperial censors, Yang Qindong didn't care about them at all. Furthermore, it wouldn't be long before he used his actions to give these people a hard slap in the face. Deputy Imperial Censor Dong Chunhua of the Imperial Censorate, a rank 3 official, seeing that there was no imperial censor of the left in the Imperial Censorate, his desire to rise was very strong. Furthermore, he had enough qualifications. All he lacked now was an opportunity. He took out a lot of his belongings to exchange for banknotes from the Yang family bank and gave them to eunuch Jining. He, who had paved the way, was just waiting for an opportunity. And now the opportunity had appeared. Such a large-scale impeachment of a duke was incited by the emperor. The 4 great ministers and the military's Governor Shiheng were also involved. If he performed well, he would be able to rise to a higher position in the future. Coincidentally, the imperial censor of the right, Qin Yi, didn't seem to be very enthusiastic about this matter. Dong Chunhua, who saw the opportunity, took the initiative to stand up and integrate the memorials with the imperial censors. He became the happiest and most enthusiastic person in this incident. During the morning court session the next day, a group of more than 30 imperial censors, led by Dong Chunhua, stood up at the same time in the Imperial Palace's conference hall. They said that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, Yang Qindong, was extremely daring. He beat up the Japanese envoy and destroyed the great Ming's image. Dozens of people said similar crimes one after another. It really felt like everyone was kicking a man who was down. The intensity of their words and sharpness of their words made it seem like Yang Qindong was the biggest scourge. If he wasn't eliminated, the entire Great Ming would feel uneasy. Zhu Qiyu, the head of defense, sat high on the throne. His expression seemed calm, but he was very happy in his heart. Even if Yang Qindong had made a lot of contributions, when the wind changed slightly, the feeling that a storm was coming could easily knock down any subject. All along, Zhu Qiyu didn't say anything, but in his heart he was afraid of this subject whose contributions were so high that they could shake the emperor. This kind of feeling made him unable to eat or drink. It also made him unable to grasp the hearts of his subjects. He wasn't sure how many of his subjects would stand on his side if he really targeted him. If he really became a loner, then this emperor wouldn't be far from stepping down. Chapter 278. But today, it seemed that the result was much better than he had imagined. There were actually so many officials who opposed Yang Qindong. Looking at it this way, once the time was right, eliminating this person should not cause too much opposition and instability in the court. Under Zhu Qiyu's gaze, with a hint of encouragement, the imperial censors of the imperial censorate tried their best to perform. In particular, the left deputy imperial censor, Dong Chanhua, did his best to perform. From his words, the Duke of Loyalty seemed to have become a malignant tumor and the embodiment of evil. If this person was not punished, the entire great Ming dynasty would not be able to see the light and hope. Not only did the memorial belittle Yang Qindong, but it also emphasized the friendly relationship between the Ming dynasty and Japan. Any officials who played a bad role in the diplomatic relations between the two countries should be punished severely. In order to express the goodwill of the great Ming dynasty, the former Japanese envoy, Aoki Yuki, should be released from prison. Dong Chuanhua's proposal quickly received the support of more officials. It must be said that Kimura Yoshida had spent a lot of money during this period of time, and most of the people who stood up to speak were people who had received benefits before. Naturally, this time, they would do their best to perform. The situation in the court was one-sided, and the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong, was described as a piece of rat shit. It seemed that because of his appearance, the great Ming dynasty had been humiliated. At this moment, most people seemed to have selectively forgotten that when Walla's army attacked the city, he was the one who stepped forward to repel the enemy, who shouted not speak, and Wang Ji did not speak. However, in such a violent situation, the silence of the same minister did not play much of a role. On the contrary, some people thought that they were afraid and wanted to protect themselves. Following that, the accusations became even more severe. Some people even suggested that the Duke of Loyalty should publicly apologize and be expelled from his fief. A public apology was equivalent to Yang Qindong admitting that he had done something wrong. As a result, the prestige and popularity that he had accumulated over many days would be greatly affected. It would even have a great impact on the reputation of Yang Qindong's bank. If this was really done, the efforts of more than a year would be completely ruined at this moment. From this, it could be seen how vicious the person who made this suggestion was. Expelling Yang Qindong back to the fief of Jianing Prefecture in Fujian was tantamount to kicking him out from the center of power. If this was really the case, it would be difficult for him to make a comeback. Perhaps in the future he could only be an idle guogong for the rest of his life. It would be difficult for him to meddle in the specific affairs and future direction of the great Ming dynasty. The two suggestions were like two sharp swords pointing straight at Yang Qindong's ribs. If all of them passed, the consequences could be imagined. Your Majesty, please reconsider. After all, the Duke of Loyalty had saved Yingzhong. If he were to leave now, it would be pushing him away, and the consequences would be unimaginable. Upon hearing that his grandson-in-law was to leave the capital, the silent Hu Shao finally couldn't hold himself back any longer and stepped forward in shock. For the sake of his grandson-in-law, He had even brought up Zhu Qijin's name in public. This in itself was somewhat disrespectful. But he was still an old official of several dynasties and an important official used by Yingzhong, so it was reasonable for him to say such a thing. "That's right. Your Majesty, please reconsider." Minister of Personnel Wang just seconded in his shock. If he admitted his wrongs today, he could use other matters tomorrow to regain his face. But once he left this place, it would be very difficult for him to make a comeback, and he truly might not be able to recover from this setback. When Zhu Qiyu heard the suggestions of his subordinates, he truly was somewhat tempted. If Yang Qindong really could leave the capital, he would have a chance to slowly turn the industries he had left behind into his own, and he might even be able to establish a business relationship with the mercenaries. He remembered that when Ji Ning had represented him to discuss business with the mercenary commander Lung Feng, the other party had said that as long as the Duke of Loyalty remained in the capital, his rights would not be transferred. But what if he was allowed to leave? Could it be that his chance had come? If he could replace Yang Qindong, then whether it was in business or military, he would be able to rise to a higher level. How could he not be tempted? However, as soon as Hu Xiao and Wang Ji stepped forward, this desire was immediately extinguished. It was for no other reason than the fact that the Great Ming was no longer a Great Ming where power was concentrated in the hands of the emperor alone. Now, there was the Southern Ming, and his imperial brother Zhu Qijin was stationed in Nanjing. If he chased away Yang Qindong, it would undoubtedly be the same as chasing him into his imperial brother's embrace. Once he obtained this person, who knew what heaven-shaking things his imperial brother would do? While his heart trembled, Zhu Qiyu didn't dare to let Yang Qindong leave without sufficient assurance. Thus, he decisively made his decision. Enough. Although the Duke of Loyalty was wrong, he shouldn't have left. How about this, Minister Dong? Go to Yangjia village and have him publicly apologize to appease the anger of the Japanese envoy. Also, in order to show the sincerity of our Great Ming's relationship with our neighbors, the Japanese envoy Aoki Yuki, who made a serious mistake before, can also be released. However, we must remind him to restrain his actions in the future. This is the Great Ming, and he can't kill indiscriminately. In the end, the emperor didn't have the intention to chase away Yang Qindong. He chose to take a step back. It was inevitable that some of the officials would be disappointed. But in any case, this time they could force Yang Qindong to publicly apologize. With this beginning, they could slowly make plans in the future. Breaking his fortress wouldn't be easy. Your Majesty is wise. All the officials seemed to have thought of this point and immediately praised Zhu Qiyu's wisdom. When the court was dismissed, the deputy imperial censor of the Ministry of Justice, Dong Chanhua, went straight to Yangjia village with great fanfare. Dong Chuanhua's face was flushed red. At this time he was extremely excited. There were so many officials, and even Shangguanshan Yi was in the imperial censorate. But in the end, the matter was still handed over to him. Didn't this already show the emperor's trust in him and that he was about to be put in an important position? When he thought about how he could finally see the ladder to becoming a second-rank official and how he could bring glory to his ancestors, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but smile. "Official Dong, please wait." Just as Dong Chanhua left the palace and was about to walk to the main street, a shout came from behind him. When he turned around, his face showed a flattered expression. "So it's official E, official U, official Jean, and official Sure." Dong Chanhua couldn't help but show this kind of expression. Suddenly, four officials came together for him. How could this kind of scene not make people excited? In the field of government, the hierarchy had always been very strict. What kind of officials could walk together and what kind of officials could talk and laugh together? All of these were very particular. For example, a second-rank official absolutely wouldn't condescend to talk and laugh with someone whose rank was lower than his. That would only be degrading his status. But now, for second-rank officials, especially under the premise that the cabinet had already disappeared, the status of these four people could only be higher than before. How could Dong Chanhua, who was only a third-rank official, not be excited when they all appeared together? The four officials walked in front of Dong Chunhua. First, they looked at him with a gaze of praise. Their gazes clearly revealed the fact that it wouldn't be long before everyone was on equal footing. It was because they saw the effort this person had put in this matter and the reward he might receive that they condescended to come here. Of the four officials, the first to speak was the Minister of War, Ming. Perhaps because Yang Qindong's appearance had stolen too much of the Ministry of War's limelight, he was the one who hated the Duke of Loyalty to the bones the most. "Official Dong, are you preparing to go to Yang Village to announce the decree?" Dong Chunhua bowed and said, "Minister Yi's words are correct." "Oh, but what does official Dong plan to do?" Ming asked with an expression that said he had already guessed it. "Of course, it's to announce the Emperor's decree." Dong Chunhua had an expression that said, "You know what I'm talking about." But after he finished speaking, he noticed that Ming and the other three officials all had serious expressions. He suddenly thought of something. What? Do the four officials believe that the Duke of Loyalty would dare to defy the decree? As soon as he said this, he thought of Yang Qindong's young and promising performance, as well as his past actions. His expression immediately became flustered. Others wouldn't dare to defy the decree. But this Duke of Loyalty who had made great contributions was not easy to deal with. That might not be the case. Ming shook his head lightly. Although Yang Qindong was bold and reckless in the end, he was still an official of the great Ming dynasty. He might not really dare to do something as reprehensible as defying the decree. Of course, if he really dared to do so, he would be taking the initiative to give others a handle. As such, there were thousands of ways to deal with him. Seeing that Ming had rejected the idea, Dong Chunhua's heart relaxed. At the same time, he couldn't help but ask, since he doesn't dare to defy the decree, what else is there to worry about? Is it worth the four officials to remind this official? We're here to remind you. I don't know if official Dong has thought about it, but since you want the Duke of Loyalty to admit his mistake, of course, the bigger the commotion, the better. However, the court assembly has just ended, and presumably the news hasn't spread yet. If you ask him to admit his mistake so early, wouldn't it benefit some people? The Minister of Revenue, Jin Lian, had a smile on his face as if he was very familiar with Dong Chunhua. Expand the influence. As someone who could become the deputy imperial censor of the left, he was naturally incomparably intelligent. After this reminder, he quickly thought of something, and then his eyes revealed a look of surprise. He only wanted to embarrass Yang Qindong, and it was a good opportunity to show off his strength. However, he forgot that even if the other party admitted his mistake, it was still possible to make a fuss about it. How was he going to admit his mistake? The degree of recognition and the kind of impact it would have could be manipulated artificially. Thinking of this, Dong Chunhua couldn't help but sigh at the experience of the four officials. His face also showed an expression of humility as he asked for advice. "This official is slow-witted, please enlighten me." Seeing that Dong Chunhua understood everyone's intentions, Ming and the other three laughed and then said, "Since official Dong has said so, if we don't give a suggestion, wouldn't it be unreasonable? How about this? If we cause a lot of trouble, why don't we find a place to arrange it and make a good plan?" This suggestion quickly received a response from everyone. Soon, the five of them brought the servants of the residence out of the imperial city, chatting and laughing, and went straight to a nearby restaurant. Chapter 279. Yang Family Academy. Yang Qindong had just taught everyone a physics lesson as a teacher. In this lesson, Yang Qindong vividly illustrated the importance of physics and explained some things that no one could understand before. He focused on the topic of gravity. This lesson could be said to have opened everyone's eyes. From Yang Qindong's explanation, everyone finally understood that not only did people do things according to a pattern, but everything in the world was the same. It was just that they were not good at discovering it before. Under the admiring gazes of dozens of students, Yang Qindong walked out of the classroom. Outside, Tiger's mane had been waiting anxiously for a long time. First, Yang Qindong took the handkerchief and wiped off the chalk foam one by one. Then he asked calmly, "What's wrong? What's the conclusion of the imperial court? Or did the eunuch come to my Yang family manor?" From these words, it could be seen that Yang Qindong had predicted the development of the matter, and it was quite accurate. In response to the young master's question, the conclusion has been reached. More than 70% of the imperial censors participated in the impeachment of the young master. In the entire imperial court, except for Minister Wang, and a few others, the rest of the people criticized the young master. In the end, the acting emperor ordered the young master to publicly apologize in order to obtain the forgiveness of the Japanese ambassador. Tiger's mane carefully told Yang Qindong the news he had just received. After he finished, he looked nervously at the young master and prepared for him to be angry. To Tiger's mane's disappointment, Yang Qindong did not seem to be very agitated. On the contrary, his expression was incomparably calm, as if he had already expected the result. After listening to Tiger's mane's retelling of everything, he sighed. Is this the so-called tolerance? The tolerance that Yang Qindong spoke of was naturally not referring to the attitude of the Dai Zong emperor and the courtiers towards him. Although he hadn't done many things, which one of them wasn't earth-shattering. By offering potatoes, he solved the problem of food and clothing for the common people, making it rare for people to starve to death due to lack of food. He saved Yingzhong and saved the face of the great Ming dynasty. He defended the capital, defeated the Walla, and maintained the stability of the capital and even the entire great Ming dynasty, giving it time to continue developing. But when all of this was over, what did he get in return? Jealousy, dissatisfaction, and resentment all emerged from his bones. How could this be the tolerance that should be given to a meritorious minister? To his own people, he would step on them whenever he could. On the contrary, to outsiders, he would show a tolerant and magnanimous side. The Japanese envoy, Kimura Yoshida, only said that if the relationship between the two countries deteriorated, Japan would invade the border by sea. Just this simple sentence, without any actual action, is the great Ming dynasty going to ask their great hero to admit his mistake? How chilling would this be? Don't they know that doing this will only hurt their loved ones and make their enemies happy? Don't they know that doing this will only make the common people lose confidence in the great Ming dynasty? Don't they know that the consequences of doing this will lead to a major event, and no one will dare to stand up and fight for the great Ming dynasty? Don't they know? At this moment, Yang Qindong's heart was as uncomfortable as a river and a sea. He understood the history of the later generations and knew that when the Han people were strong, they were always willing to show their magnanimous side, but often when they were weak, it was time for them to pay a heavy price. This price caused some dynasties to change, some caused the common people to be displaced, some caused the civilization to be seriously damaged, and some caused many Chinese treasures to fall into the arms of the motherland, forever unable to return to the embrace of the motherland. And all of these developments formed history, which was also a history of blood and tears. People said that if one looked at history as a mirror, one could know the rise and fall, and if one looked at people as a mirror, one could see the gains and losses. It was precisely because he understood too much about these things that Yang Qindong decided to change everything, and the idea of the great Ming dynasty occupied an extremely important position. Only after understanding history did he know what kind of people could not be forgiven and forgiven. Japan was the most typical example. This small and weak race originated from the end of the Qin dynasty, and it could even be said that they were of the same origin as the Han people. This caused many of their habits and even their language to be similar. However, perhaps because of their geographical location, they felt a sense of urgency and nervousness from the moment they were born. It was this kind of pressure that allowed them to exert strength that was several times greater than their own. This was also a side branch of the Han people. Whenever the Han people were weak, they would send troops and take advantage of them before leaving. On the other hand, when the Han people were strong, they would wag their tails and beg for mercy, showing their weak and pitiful side. This method was repeated over and over again, and it worked every time. However, it was able to make the Han people tolerate it time and time again, causing them to be in a situation where it was too late to regret it. It was precisely because he understood too much that Yang Qindong had a different feeling. Facing a side branch of the Han people that could turn hostile and bite you at any time, the best way to deal with it was not to be magnanimous and tolerate it, nor was it to be magnanimous and change it. Instead, it was to replace it, assimilate it, and devour it. Only then would it be over. In other words, the so-called tolerance would not work on the Japanese. On the contrary, they should directly devour them and then change them from the bottom of their hearts until they face their own bloodline and origin and let them know that they were also part of the Han people. Only then could it be considered a complete solution. Of course, anyone could have such thoughts, but more importantly, whether or not they could do it was the most important. However, Yang Qindong, who possessed the Okura, already had the ability to do so. With the advanced weapons in the Okura in the world at that time, there was no country, race, or individual that could resist technology that was hundreds of years more advanced than theirs. Since the conditions in terms of hardware had been met, the next step was to create an opportunity and decisively make a move. Inform Commander Gao Xiong with the fastest speed possible and quickly get into position and carry out the original plan. Yang Qindong, who had made a decision in his heart, decisively made a decision. Then he looked in the direction of the capital and said, "Blindly tolerating is not the best way to deal with some people. There should be no kindness in the first place. It's a pity that ignorant people like you can't understand this. Since that's the case, then let me teach you a lesson." An expert in civil war, an amateur in foreign war. This was a bad habit in many dynasties, just like Dong Chunhua and the others. When the Walla army approached the capital, they were helpless. Not only that, they were thinking about how to escape and how to leave safely. However, when facing the great hero who defeated the Walla, they were very smart and used many methods to frame him. It was as if they had suddenly become a different person, very smart and used many methods. Under the planning of Dong Chunhua, Ming, and the other ministers of the 4 departments, the Japanese envoy Kimura Yoshida first appeared on the busiest street in the capital. He told everyone about the friendship between Japan and the Great Ming, and said that this friendship could have lasted for tens of thousands of years. However, it was precisely because of the rashness of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage that this friendship had been destroyed, and the consequence was very likely to cause a war between the 2 countries, which would affect the lives of the people. Not only would the quality of life decline, but many people would also die. This was an important matter that concerned the ordinary people. At the same time, another saying spread through the streets and alleys of the capital. That was the young Dong Shuai, the young war god, the young Duke of Loyalty and Courage, had become arrogant. He did not care about the peaceful life of the people at all and advocated to send troops to Japan. This kind of disregard for the feelings of a friendly country and the life and death of the people was just to show his talent in leading troops to war. This kind of behavior that only cared about himself and did not care about others quickly attracted the disgust of many people who did not know the truth. Yang Qindong, who was originally very popular among the people, suffered a big blow in his image. At this time, there were even business groups that added insult to injury. They suddenly increased the price of their goods. But to outsiders, it was all because of Yang Qindong's proposal to pay the taxes. The taxes were heavy, and for their own interests, the merchants could only raise the price of their goods. In the end, the people who paid for all of this were the ordinary people. All kinds of things sprung up like bamboo shoots after a rain, causing the hearts of some people who originally supported Yang Qindong to be greatly shaken. Some people who did not know the truth and did not know the truth directly removed the longevity tablets of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage from their homes. Some people even burned the tablets to vent their hatred. These were the ordinary people. In the era when information was not developed, they were easily swayed by all kinds of false information and public opinion. Perhaps it was the kindness in their bones that made it easier for them to be deceived by others. It was precisely because they had kindness in their hearts that they thought others would be as kind as they were, that they would not think of others as evil, and that made it easier for others to take advantage of them. The public opinion changed greatly. The direct result was that fewer people went to the Yang clan's bank to deposit money, and more people went to withdraw money. Fewer people went to the immortal abode to eat. It had originally been difficult to find a single seat, but now it was completely deserted. Fewer people went to the heavens beyond trading company to pick up their goods. There were a few merchants who wanted to take advantage of this situation to make a fortune, but they were often attacked not long after picking up their goods. The direct result was that their goods were stolen, and they suffered heavy losses. Once these things were reported to the authorities, they would not be known, and no one would bother to ask about them. The Security Bureau recorded everything that happened every day and sent it to Yang Qindong. In the study, the amount of information written on paper increased with each passing day, piling up high. It was worrisome. Chapter 280. Madame Snow and Madame Snow had also returned to the Yang clan manor because of the lack of activity in the immortal abode. This was also Yang Qindong's idea. Even though they were only losing money, he didn't dare guarantee that there wouldn't be people who would take the risk and suddenly attack his family. Tung Shan had led the 100 soldiers of 3rd Company to Walla to open up a trade route and had yet to return. In the capital, Yang Qindong didn't have a lot of manpower at his disposal. He couldn't take care of everything, so shrinking his forces was inevitable. Young Master, another 3 million taels of silver was withdrawn from the bank today. It's already been like this for 5 days. If this continues, I'm afraid that we won't have enough gold left in the treasury, Tiger's Mane said, his forehead drenched in sweat. Originally, the Yang clan bank had prepared 1 million taels of gold to protect the interests of its depositors. Based on the ratio of 1 to 10, it was enough to pay out 10 million taels of gold. If nothing major happened, it would be enough. But what no one expected was that the sudden situation would cause the depositors to withdraw large amounts of money. Of the 1 million taels of gold they had prepared, less than 100,000 taels remained. If someone withdrew another 1 million taels of silver tomorrow, they really might not be able to pay out the money. The bank still has 500,000 taels of gold in the cellar. You can use it first. Yang Qindong didn't appear as anxious as Tiger's Mane. He was still as calm as ever, giving off the feeling that everything was within his expectations. Yes, Tiger's Mane nodded, but then he said timidly, but enough. There's no need to say anything more. I know what you mean, but you can relax. The crisis will be resolved in a few days. As the head of the family, Yang Qindong had a lot of data in his mind. For example, during this period of time, the Yang family's bank had deposited a total of 30 million taels of silver, of which he had loaned out nearly 10 million taels of silver to those merchants who were trustworthy. Of the remaining 20 million taels, 9 million had already been withdrawn. However, it had only been 5 days. If the situation continued to develop, if 30 million customers came to withdraw their money, the Yang family bank would face a crisis of bankruptcy. It was precisely because Tiger's Mane knew about this that he wanted to see if he could urge the merchants to repay their loans as soon as possible. In this way, with 10 million yuan as capital, plus the 5 million yuan in the Yang family manor, it should be enough to deal with the crisis of people withdrawing their money. Speaking of which, Tiger's Mane wasn't wrong. According to the information from the Security Bureau, there were many big businessmen involved in this broadcasting incident, including many businessmen who had taken loans from the Yang family bank. They borrowed money from the Yang family's bank on one hand and ran a bank run on the Yang family's bank on the other hand, all because they didn't want to return the money. Just think about it. If the bank was gone, would the loan still need to be returned? Because of this, there were still many businessmen coming to the Yang family's bank to talk about loans. However, in the current situation, as the manager, Yang Fu didn't dare to agree. Of course, he rejected them one by one. Because of this incident, many businessmen talked about the Yang family bank in public and said that it wasn't good. It gave people the feeling that the bank was already unable to make ends meet. After the actions of the businessmen were investigated by the Security Bureau, they reported it to the sixth young master. As the leader of the action team, Tigers Mane, who was also the leader of the Langus Special Forces, even made a detailed battle plan. However, when the matter was reported to Yang Qindong, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. There wasn't the slightest response. This was why Tigers Mane said, but... However, he was still interrupted by Yang Qindong in time. Okay, let's move the gold away first to solve the problem. Tigers Mane had followed Yang Qindong for many years and knew the temper of the young master. Once a decision was made, there was no room for discussion. He cupped his fist and left the study room. After Tigers Mane left, Yang Qindong's gaze fell on a map hanging on the wall. It was the map of the Ming dynasty's maritime border, and the Tianjin Guard was highlighted with a red pen. It seemed to indicate that something was going to happen there. Dong Mansion. Deputy Censor of the left, Dong Chunhua, was leaning back in his chair with a smug look on his face. Standing in front of him was a butler in a long robe. At this moment, he was talking nonstop about what he had seen and heard. Master, at noon today, the Yang family manor transported 500,000 taels of gold and sent it to the Yang family bank in the city. After the housekeeper finished explaining the last matter, he stood respectfully, looking as if he wanted to listen to his teachings. Oh, isn't that the same as taking out 5 million taels of silver? This loyal duke is really rich. Dong Chunhua's eyes narrowed slightly. There was a trace of a proud smile in his eyes as he continued, very good. The richer he is, the greater my profits will be. Let's get ready. Tomorrow morning, I will make a trip to Yang Village. The 5 days of preparation made Yang Qindong lose a lot of reputation and wealth. It was time for him to make a move. Once this heavy hammer was smashed, once the loyal eunuch apologized and admitted his mistake, his reputation would be ruined. Once this matter was spread out, his reputation would plummet. At that time, there would definitely be many people who would kick him while he was down. At that time, the loyal eunuch would inevitably lose both his life and wealth. In order to reward himself, it would be natural for him to go one step further in his official career. Dong Chunhua was very excited and even a little excited. He had begun to look forward to a new day. He wanted to see Yang Qindong's appearance when he made a fool of himself. On the contrary, in the palace, eunuch Jining, who had been watching all this from behind the scenes, frowned slightly. He was unable to feel happy. It had been 5 days since the court assembly. Although it seemed that Dong Chunhua, who had given the emperor's orders, was advancing step by step and making the situation look good for him, for some reason, he did not feel happy at all. Why isn't he fighting back? What is he waiting for? Jining muttered to himself in his room. After dealing with Yang Qindong several times, he had already experienced the power of his opponent. He did not believe that it would be so easy to defeat the youngest duke. If that was the case, the emperor would not be so afraid. He would not be a mere incompetent official without taking any action. No, he must have a backup plan. At least until now, that mysterious power has not appeared. Pouring a mouthful of tea into his mouth, Jining's expression became even more uneasy. He would not forget that Yang Qindong had reminded all the eunuchs not to call themselves eunuchs. In the end, that night, 14 eunuchs had been threatened to varying degrees. It was also after that incident that Jining no longer dared to underestimate Yang Qindong. Eunuch, what did you say? Are you going to attack? In the corner of the room stood the commander of the brocade guards, Lu Gui. Because Jining's voice had been too soft, he had not heard it clearly. However, he knew that Jining had spoken and thought that it was an order. No, don't attack first. Wait and see. Also, you must restrain your subordinates. Without my orders, they must not attack as they please." Jining shook his head. His intuition told him that Yang Qindong would not simply wait for death. Sometimes, not doing anything did not mean that he would not do anything. On the contrary, when someone like this retaliated, it would be a thunderous blow. Jining did not want to be the one struck by lightning. Yang family manor. It was already late at night. A guest suddenly appeared before the eyes of the hidden sentries. Immediately, a few silence-type 95 guns were aimed at the incoming shadow. When the shadow came closer and closer and was already within 60 meters of the sentries, a voice suddenly rang out from the darkness. "Password." Huang reply. The shadow was first shocked to the spot by the sudden shout, but then he replied in a familiar voice. "River." The voice rang out again in the darkness. Then it returned to silence. The person who had come knew today's password. He must be a spy from the Security Bureau. Immediately, the person was led into the outskirts of the Yang family manor. Then Yang Si, who was in charge of the night watch, received him. Not long after, Yang Si's figure appeared in the inner manor. After a while, the light in Yang Qindong's study was lit. When Yang Qindong put on a coat and entered the study, Yang Si knelt on the ground and said, "Young master, the Security Bureau has just sent news. The people they sent have already received Commander Teng Shan's group. They have already completed their first trade with the Vala Empire. This time, they brought back a total of 3 million silvers. Many of the Vala Empire's merchants also came along with them. They also brought a lot of money with them, wanting to buy our goods from beyond heavens. Now, their group is only a day away from the capital. If there are no accidents, they will enter the city tomorrow afternoon when the city gates close." "Oh, so fast?" Hearing this news, Yang Qindong's face was very excited. According to the previous estimate, Teng Shan and Bai Peng's group would need at least half a month to return. After all, the transportation at that time was not very developed. In addition, Great Ming and Walla were enemies. There were even some areas that did not have roads and needed to be reopened. Now that they had returned so quickly, it could be seen that Teng Shan and the others had put in a lot of effort. Of course, the reason why they returned so quickly was because Teng Shan was worried about the safety of the 6th young master. But no matter what, they had returned with a large amount of gold and silver and many customers. They had solved the crisis of the Yang family bank. This allowed Yang Qindong to do things with less worry. Very good, they came back at the right time. How about this, Yang Si? Let the Security Bureau go into the city and inform Yang Fu. Tell him that we can agree to the loans of those merchants. However, we have to raise the interest by 3%. Humph! Didn't they want to see this young master fall and take advantage of it? Now, I want to let these people know that there is no such thing as a free lunch in this world." Yang Qindong's eyes shone as he spoke. Chapter 281. Previously, those merchants had sought out Cousin Yang Fu in the name of a reasonable loan, saying that they were in urgent need of silver. As long as they could meet their demands, they could accept an appropriate increase in interest. They were clearly trying to take advantage of the situation. The Yang clan bank was in a crisis, so Yang Fu had naturally rejected these requests. This action had caused them to speak carelessly, greatly affecting the reputation of the Yang clan bank. Now that the new silver had come in, and a large number of Walla merchants had followed them, it could be seen that this was a large sum of money coming into the account. Thus, it would not be Yang Qindong's personality if he did not use this opportunity to strike back. These thoughts instantly formed in Yang Qindong's mind. Yang Si naturally did not react so quickly, but since the order was given by the 6th young master, he would naturally obey unconditionally. After agreeing, he quickly left the study to deliver the news. When he was the only one left in the study, Yang Qindong used the candlelight to look at the map hanging on the wall and stood there for a long time. Very few people in the capital knew that Tung Mountain and the Bai clan caravan had returned. Early in the morning, after Dong Chunhua had her breakfast, she sat in the carriage that had been prepared beforehand. Accompanied by a few of her attendants, she headed straight for the Yang village. Along the way, Dong Chunhua was naturally excited. This time, he was representing the emperor in reprimanding the Duke of Loyalty and then ordering him to admit his wrongs. This was an awe-inspiring matter. Moreover, after this matter was completed, he might even be promoted. No matter how he thought about it, he was extremely happy. This was the Duke of Loyalty. He had once saved Yingzong's life and helped Emperor Zong stabilize the country. He was not even 20 years old, but he had relied on his own efforts to obtain the title of Duke of Loyalty. He was also known as the God of War and the Commander of the East. How glorious was that! And now he had to take the initiative to admit his mistake under his own reprimand. How satisfying was that! Presumably, after this matter would become a stepping stone for him to climb up the ranks. It would also become the most glorious thing in his life. Filled with excitement, the carriage left the capital and arrived at the Yang family manor. As soon as the carriage arrived, the attendant immediately shouted at Lung Feng, who was a few dozen meters away. "Quickly inform the Duke of Loyal Courage to come here. My lord has a verbal order from the emperor." Wait, since the other party claimed to have the emperor's orders, Lung Feng didn't dare to be negligent. Although the others were still keeping a close eye on the newcomer, they still sent a soldier to the inner courtyard of the Yang clan manor. Yang Qindong didn't have any classes to teach this morning. At this time, he was watching the four ladies play mahjong. This was also something that he had invented. Once it appeared, many people accepted it. Over the past few days, the Immortal Abode's business had taken a hit. Madame Shui and Madame Xiang stayed in the manor and learned mahjong from Madame Huyen. The four of them were perfect for a game. Yang Qindong, on the other hand, had become a spectator. All he could do was occasionally stand in front of Madame Shui and Madame Xiang, who weren't playing too well, and point at them. Yang Qindong, who had just ordered Madame Shui to play a bad tile and fired a cannon at Huyen, received a beautiful eye roll from her. When he saw Tiger's mane appear outside the door, he immediately walked over. As soon as he saw the young master, Tiger's mane said, "Dong Chunhua is here." Yang Qindong wasn't surprised in the slightest. On the contrary, he seemed to be looking forward to it. He's finally willing to show himself. No one knew that early in the morning, the Bureau of Security had sent word that Gao Xiong had led 200 Lung Feng and 2,000 naval reinforcements to attack the Tianjin garrison last night. They had entered through the port that had stopped construction. They had suddenly appeared and caught the Ming army post off guard. They captured more than 3,000 people and seized countless military resources. The Bureau of Security had contacted them through a very important radio station, so they had received the news early in the morning. The Ming army, which could only be informed orally, would not receive the news until the next morning, even if they used an 800-mile express. This was the advantage of advanced technology. Sometimes the earlier they got the news, the earlier they could prepare, and the higher their chances of winning would be. It was at this time that Dong Chunhua appeared. This person had grasped the timing very well. If it had been a day ago, Yang Qindong would not have been so confident. However, since the other party had only appeared after receiving the news, he had no choice but to properly entertain the other party. "Very well, since the guest is here, let him in." Yang Qindong's face was full of sarcasm. "By the way, the students should be doing exercises between classes now. Arrange to meet him there." "Understood, young master." Tiger's mane's face was also full of excitement. This Dong Chunhua actually dared to recklessly go against the young master. Since that was the case, he would show him some power and let him meet with a nose full of dust. He would let him know who he could never afford to offend. There were less than 70 people left in the Yang Qindong Academy. Even with this number, it was still decreasing, but those who stayed were all gold. They all had something they were good at and were appreciated by Yang Qindong, which was why they had stayed until now. When Yang Qindong appeared, these people were doing exercises between classes. This was also Yang Qindong's request. They could study and train their bodies at the same time. He did not want bookworms. These students did not have to be better than those in the military, but they had to at least be healthy. Yang Qindong's appearance immediately attracted everyone's attention. Originally, there was no teacher's class, so they did not know why Dong Shuai would appear here. But they soon had an answer. An official wearing the Ming dynasty's third-rank official's uniform walked into the field under the guidance of Yang Si. The person's lips were slightly thin, and his body was slightly plump. His eyes were constantly moving, and he first glanced contemptuously at the nearly 70 academy students standing on the square. He even involuntarily let out a cold snort from his nose. Then he stared at Yang Qindong without the slightest hint of respect in his expression. The person who came was Dong Chanhua. The reason why he looked at the academy with such a cold gaze was because once Yang Qindong fell, these students of the Yang Qindong Academy would be ostracized by everyone. Such a person would not be accepted by everyone. Such a person naturally had no future. Since he was a person with no future, why should he give him any face? When he looked at Yang Qindong, there was not the slightest respect in his expression. His attitude was very clear. He thought that this loyal duke would fall without a doubt. Facing such a person who was about to lose power, he did not even bother to show respect on the surface. Dong Chuanhua's performance was very realistic. Yang Qindong also did not look at the other party. Even if the person came and was already standing there, he still treated him as invisible air and did not pay any attention to him. This made Dong Chanhua, who was standing there, embarrassed. He was a dignified third-rank official of the imperial court who was about to enter the second rank. Coming to a manor and being ignored was definitely a slap in the face. But he came uninvited, so he could not blame others. Cough helplessly in order to show his existence. He had to cough heavily to attract everyone's attention. Sure enough, this cough made Yang Qindong gently turn his face, as if he had just noticed him. His face was full of surprise as he said, "Who are you? How did you appear in my Yang family academy?" Face to face, Yang Qindong did not recognize him. Dong Chanhua was angry in his heart. Thinking back to the time when Dong Shuai got married, he came with the officials to congratulate. At that time, everyone was chatting happily. How long had it been? And now he did not recognize him. Knowing that Yang Qindong deliberately did this, Dong Chanhua still had to introduce himself. "I am the left deputy imperial censor of the censorate, Dong Chanhua. I am here to speak on behalf of the emperor." After saying this arrogantly, Dong Chanhua looked up to the sky, waiting for Yang Qindong to say the 3 respectful words, "Follow the emperor's orders." But when he looked up to the sky, he did not get any response. When he turned his head back to look, he was so angry that smoke almost came out of his 7 orifices. He saw that Yang Qindong was focused on the students of the academy doing exercises. He did not have the slightest intention of replying. It was as if he was talking to the air just now. "Loyal and courageous? What are you doing?" In anger, Dong Chanhua could not help but scold loudly. After being shouted, Yang Qindong turned his head very casually. Immediately, an unstoppable murderous aura appeared in his eyes. When this murderous gaze landed on Dong Chanhua, it actually caused his entire body to involuntarily tremble and his legs to tremble. At this moment, he seemed to see a knife shining with cold light on his neck, as if it would fall and take his life at any time. In his previous life, Yang Qindong had broken through a mountain of corpses and a sea of fire. In this life, he had become Yang Qindong, so he had a good grasp of the murderous aura. Suddenly putting this murderous aura on Dong Chanhua, who was born as a scholar, the effect could be imagined. Looking at Dong Chanhua, who was shivering all over, Yang Qindong said with displeasure in his voice, "What are you shouting here for? "Don't lose the face of a scholar." He was actually reprimanded. Dong Chunhua was so angry that his teeth were chattering. He thought in his heart, "How is this possible? How is this possible?" It was said that no matter what rank an official was, when someone came to speak on behalf of the emperor, they should respectfully say the 3 words, "Obey the emperor's orders." Only in this way could they show respect for the emperor's power, which was the duty of an official. It was with this thought that Dong Chunhua came to Yang village with full confidence. But after coming here, he realized that everything was so different. This young, loyal, and courageous duke did not seem to take him or the emperor's admonition seriously. Chapter 282. Of course, if Dong Chunhua knew that even when facing Zhu Qiyu, Yang Qindong did not have the slightest bit of respect in his heart, then he would be relieved. Dong Chunhua, who was being reprimanded, felt that his momentum was rapidly declining. He could not even guarantee that if this continued, he would not be able to complete his next sentence. In order to complete his mission, he could not turn around and leave. What he had to do was to complete his mission with anger. Dong Chunhua did not want to talk to Yang Qindong anymore. He also felt that he could not gain any advantage, so he did not even look at the Duke of Zhongdan. Instead, he said what he had prepared before: "The emperor has decreed that Japan has been a friendly neighbor of the great Ming dynasty for generations." Duke of Zhongdan tore down Japan's gate for no reason, beat up the envoy, and almost caused a war between the 2 countries. This is a serious crime. The Duke of Zhongdan is ordered to apologize to the Japanese envoy immediately after receiving the decree to clear up the misunderstanding and reconcile the 2 sides. Dong Chunhua had already memorized Zhu Qiyu's reprimand. Now that he opened his mouth, it was very smooth. In his words, there was a lot of dissatisfaction. When these words were heard by the students of the Yang Academy, many of them began to breathe heavily. Obviously, they were frightened. Among the students, Junko was also among them. When she heard that the Ming emperor actually asked Yang Qindong to apologize to Kimura Yoshida, the corners of her mouth naturally curled up slightly. As a Japanese, such an action, of course, made her feel proud. But then, her expression became a little nervous. Over the past few days, she had gained some understanding of this young Dong Shuai. Whatever he did, he would never regret. Wanting him to admit his mistake, Emperor Ming had really made the wrong decision. But in the face of the emperor's decree, what should he do? Dong Chunhua used nearly half a cup of tea's time to recite the reprimand from beginning to end. Then, when he stopped, he looked at Yang Qindong with a gleam of gloating in his eyes. "Aren't you, Yang Qindong, awesome? Aren't you arrogant? Aren't you able to ignore me? Well then, now that the emperor has given the verbal order, do you still dare to disobey?" Dong Chunhua had a smile on her face and regained the arrogant expression she had when she arrived. However, in the end, he did not understand Yang Qindong. As a person of the later generation, he did not have the same respect for imperial power as the ancient people. If he was facing an ancient emperor, perhaps he would lower his head out of reverence. However, substitute sect master Zhu Qiyu was clearly not one of them. Seeing that Dong Chunhua had finished speaking, Yang Qindong nodded to indicate that he understood, and then waved his hand casually. Yang Si, who had accompanied him, gestured towards Dong Chunhua, indicating that he was going to lead her away from the manor. Dong Chunhua was still waiting for Yang Qindong to express his stance. She was waiting for him to lower his head and admit his mistake. How could she be willing to leave? Seeing that he was about to become an exiled person, he said angrily, "Duke of loyalty and courage?" What he said just now was His Majesty's intention to reprimand you. Don't you have anything to say? Or do you dare to disobey an imperial edict? Dong Chunhua's words could be said to strike at the heart. If Yang Qindong dared to admit this point, then he only needed to publicize it, and a rebel hat would be placed on his head. In this way, no matter how much Zhu Qiyu admired this person, and how much he feared this person, he could only kill him. Otherwise, where would the imperial power be? Where would the imperial power be? Before coming here, there were people who said that Yang Qindong was extremely daring and that he rarely placed the great Ming dynasty's laws in his eyes. However, Dong Chunhua did not take it to heart and thought that everyone was exaggerating. Even if this person liked to rely on his abilities to be arrogant, he still had to lower his head in the face of imperial power. But now, Dong Chunhua finally knew that those people were not speaking nonsense. This Duke of Loyalty and Courage truly did not place the Emperor's verbal order in his eyes. This was because Yang Qindong was looking at him as if he was looking at a clown. This Duke already understands His Majesty's intentions. However, I don't agree with some of the points. The Japanese diplomatic group first sent people to assassinate this Duke. After the assassination failed, they wanted to use the two countries to threaten this Duke. Faced with such an aggressive situation, I only tore down the other party's door and beat up a few blind lackeys. I really don't know what crime I committed. Could it be that when encountering a problem, it's not about who is right, but whose fist is harder? When Dong Chunhua heard Yang Qindong's rhetorical question, his expression changed again and again. This person actually publicly said that he did not agree with His Majesty's words and decision. What was he trying to do? Was he trying to rebel? Dong Chunhua's heart was still changing with mixed feelings. Yang Qindong continued, "Lord Dong, you don't need to use imperial power to pressure me." This time His Majesty must have been deceived by a lowly person and made such a statement. In addition, you don't need to talk about rebellion. Presumably, this is not His Majesty's intention, but something you added at the last minute, right? If this Duke wanted to rebel, why didn't I bring Yingzong back to the capital when I saved him? This kind of thing where the Son of Heaven is used to order his vassals has happened many times in history, right? If this Duke wanted to rebel, why did I lead people to beat back the Walla army when they came to the city and then obediently return to Zhongdangong? Your thinking is still too childish. It's better to go back and think about it carefully. Oh, right, this Duke also wants to advise you. In the future, if you want to question me, you should at least find someone with a higher rank, at least of the same rank as this Duke. You are just a third-rank official. You really don't deserve to have a fair conversation with this Duke. At the end, Yang Qindong laughed. However, the contempt and ridicule in that smile could be seen by anyone. He was refuted by Yang Qindong and was even reprimanded by Yang Qindong. In the end, he was even thrown out of the manor. When Yang Si pulled him out of the manor like a little chick, Dong Chunhua's face was ashen. At this moment, he wanted nothing more than to find a hole to crawl into. Bold and presumptuous. Bold and presumptuous. Just wait for the Emperor to get angry and take away the Duke's hat. At that time, let's see how you can continue to be so imposing. Even though he was out of the manor, Dong Chunhua still shouted and shouted. Then he angrily got on the sedan and went straight to the capital, to the imperial palace. He wanted to tell the Emperor everything that had happened here today, and then let the Emperor issue an imperial edict to punish Yang Qindong severely. Dong Chunhua left, but Yang Qindong didn't leave. He stayed on the field of the academy. His gaze swept across the nearly 70 students, and his face was solemn as he spoke. Everyone, write an article about what happened today and hand it to me before dinner. Teacher, what do you think? After Yang Qindong finished speaking, he prepared to leave, but a voice came from behind him. The person who spoke was the student, Wang Si. Wang Si and Yu Yuanbi's fight was finally released because Li Wenxiao was investigated. From this incident, he could see that as his teacher, Yang Qindong was protecting him. This made him even more determined to choose the Yang Academy and become a student here. However, Yang Qindong still disobeyed the imperial edict, and he was worried about him. Yang Qindong, who was stopped by Wang Si, stopped. After a moment of silence, he suddenly raised his head and said, "Teacher, I only know one thing, and it can be summed up in one sentence. If you fall behind, you will be beaten. If you fall behind, you will be beaten. When these simple words entered the ears of the students, their eyes immediately lit up and they felt as if they had been enlightened. Although the words were simple, the summary was very accurate. Just like how the Walla dared to invade the borders of the Great Ming Dynasty, wasn't it because the Great Ming Dynasty's national strength was weakening? Just like how the Japanese envoy dared to threaten the Great Ming Dynasty, wasn't it also because the Great Ming Dynasty was weak? If the Great Ming Dynasty was strong enough, others could only submit. How would they dare to covet the Great Ming Dynasty? Among the students, Junko was also shocked by these words. She thought of her father. If her father was strong enough, would he still need to be afraid of the other aristocratic families in the country? Would he still need to consider what General Ashikaga Yoshimasa would think? While the students were still thinking, Yang Qindong had already left the academy and returned to the inner courtyard of the Yang family manor. Pass down the order. Pay attention to every movement in the capital. Yang Qindong had to be vigilant, although he didn't think that Zhu Qi would do anything because of Dong Chunhua's report. After all, this was the territory of the Great Ming Dynasty. If they really turned hostile with the strength of his subordinates, if they were not prepared, they would not be able to withstand it. And even if they were prepared, they would only be forced to leave. After all, there was a huge gap in the number of people, and it was far from being covered by an advanced firearm. Unless he wanted to kill Zhu Qiyu and those ministers, but in this way the country would be in chaos, and it was really not a blessing for the Han people. The imperial city of the capital. When Dong Chunhua saw Emperor Zhu Qiyu, he immediately angrily told him what he had done in the Yang family manor. Your Majesty, this Duke of Loyalty simply despised the imperial power and is really a traitor. If we don't get rid of him, it will not be enough to show the imperial power. After saying that, Dong Chunhua banged his head on the ground with a thump, his face full of indignation and grievance. Shut up! Zhu Qiyu's angry roar resounded throughout the hall. What kind of person was Yang Qindong? Although Zhu Qiyu didn't know much about him, he still knew some things. At least until now, this person had not shown any intention of rebelling. Otherwise, why would he save Zhu Qijin and block the vanguard of the Walla cavalry for him? But at the same time, this person was unconstrained and liked to be free. It was because of this that after the war he was given the title of Duke, so that he could be free and stay away from the court, and everyone would be annoyed if they didn't see each other. Of course, it was not that Zhu Qiyu didn't want to get rid of this person. But firstly, he couldn't find a suitable excuse, and secondly, this person had a very good relationship with the mercenaries. If he wanted to make a move and failed, he would have to face the roar of the storm. Chapter 283. Without absolute certainty, Zhu Qiyu wouldn't make a move. Of course, this was also because this person didn't threaten him. At least, he hadn't shown any intention of doing so. This was also why the two of them hadn't fallen out with each other yet. But now, Dong Chunhua actually wanted him to get rid of Yang Qindong. How could he make this decision lightly? This was why he had opened his mouth to scold him. Of course, Yang Qindong didn't give him face and refused to admit his wrongs. This made Zhu Qiyu angry, but being angry didn't mean that he had to get rid of him. The new army hadn't finished training yet. The safety of the Great Ming still depended on this person. Fortunately, Yang Qindong still gave him face from Dong Chunhua's words. He explained that he hadn't received the imperial edict and said that he had been deceived by a vile person. This gave him a way out. Suddenly stopped by Zhu Qiyu's shout, Dong Chunhua's expression changed greatly. He didn't know what he had said wrong. He hurriedly bowed his head to the ground again. Your Majesty, please calm your anger. It's not worth it to harm your health. Official Dong was angry in a moment of anger, but it is understandable. This time, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage has indeed gone too far. Jining, who had been standing to the side, saw that the emperor was angry and Dong Chunhua was frightened. She immediately stepped forward to speak as a partner. Jin Ying's words finally reached Zhu Qiyu's heart. Although he didn't want to fall out with Yang Qindong right now, this person had already done something that went against imperial authority. If he didn't do anything and word got out, it would have a big impact on his throne. Beloved official Jin, in your opinion, what should we do? Your Majesty, why don't we have minister who reprimand the Duke of Loyalty and Courage in court tomorrow? With minister who taking action, he will definitely have to reflect on his actions. Jining had a flattering smile on her face as she made a ruthless suggestion. Oh, Zhu Qiyu suddenly understood after hearing this. Not bad, not bad. Beloved official Jin's words are exactly what we want. In that case, we will hand this matter over to Hu Shao at court tomorrow morning. Dai Zong's complexion became much better, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. When he saw Dong Chunhua kneeling on the ground, he sighed and said, Beloved Minister Dong, you've worked hard these past few days. I already understand your intentions. In any case, Dong Chunhua's actions were for the sake of maintaining imperial power. Zhu Qiyu naturally saw this point clearly. He needed such loyal officials. Even if they were not as capable, they could still be used. Hearing this, Dong Chunhua immediately burst into tears. His head hit the ground heavily again. Thank you, Your Majesty. Long live Your Majesty. Dong Chunhua left the palace. When she left, she was in good spirits. After the people from the Intelligence Bureau reported the situation back to Yang Village, Yang Qindong's expression didn't change when he heard the news, but he was obviously relieved. Young Master, the army in the capital hasn't moved. It seems like they don't intend to target our Yang clan. Tiger's Mane, who had come to report the situation, shared his opinion as well. Our acting emperor knows what's good for him. Yang Qindong's expression returned to normal as he spoke. When Yang Qindong defied the imperial edict this time, he had already prepared for the worst. That was, Zhu Qiyu would fall out with him. If that was the case, even though he had the cold blade, he had too few people. For safety's sake, he could only fight his way out of the capital. He could either meet up with Commander Gao Xiong and the others from the Tianjin garrison or go to Zhu Qijin's place in Nanjing. After more than a year of scheming, it was certain that his estate would suffer losses. However, Zhu Qiyu wouldn't be able to gain any benefits from doing so. If everyone fell out with him, his days in the capital would definitely not be easy. This was originally a situation where both sides would suffer losses. Fortunately, Zhu Qijin didn't choose to do so. This matter allowed Yang Qindong to see where his shortcomings were. He had too few soldiers. Even if he had advanced firearms, he wouldn't be able to intimidate the enemy. The moment something unpredictable happened, there was a high chance that he would meet his foes with weapons. It seems like I'll have to find a chance to go out for a while, Yang Qindong muttered to himself. The cold blade's test had been far too harsh, making the size of the army a huge problem. However, he had always walked the path of elite soldiers. Ordinary soldiers were not worthy of his attention. Most importantly, he did not want to see a large number of soldiers who believed in him die on the battlefield. That would be a very sad thing. The cold blade needed time to expand, and the defense of Crimson City also required large amounts of manpower and resources. In these circumstances, increasing the number of soldiers in a short amount of time was nothing more than a pipe dream. Since this was the case, it was better to leave the capital for a while and give himself enough time to develop. As long as the cold blade was strong enough, when he returned to the capital, he naturally wouldn't have to worry about anyone doing anything to him. Tiger's Mane, issue an order. Have the Bureau of Security keep an eye on the situation in Guangxi and Guangdong. At the same time, have Commander Lung Song get ready. If something happens, we're to fish in troubled waters and expand the situation. Yang Qindong recalled the Shenping Heavenly King incident that would occur 1 month later in history, the rebellion in Guangdong, and Zhu Huiwan's Miao uprising. Thus, he had prepared for a rainy day and issued a military order. The Yang clan manor was safe for the time being because of Zhu Qiyu's apprehension. More importantly, he had been emperor for far too short a time, and he had inherited a terrible mess. Developing it would also require time, so he had tolerated Yang Qindong's defiance of the decree. Just because the fire had not been ignited did not mean that it would not burn. On the second day of the court session, Zhu Qiyu's first order of business was to have the Minister of Rights, Hu Shao, persuade Yang Qindong to admit his wrongs and appease the anger of the Japanese emissary. Zhu Qiyu had just arrived at court and sat on the dragon throne of the emperor, his gaze sweeping over the officials. Intentionally or unintentionally, his gaze had fallen on Hu Shao. At this moment, a young eunuch quietly walked up to Jining and whispered something to him. Originally, Jining was standing there calmly with a faint smile on his face. No one could tell what he was thinking, but when he heard the eunuch's report, his face slightly paled. The eunuch said that when the city gates opened early in the morning, the cold blade soldiers responsible for opening trade with the Walla had returned, 100 of them. This meant that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage's strength in the capital had once more increased. These 100 people were not ordinary soldiers, but an army with elite and advanced firearms. He later learned that a single company of cold blade soldiers could withstand the charge of thousands or even tens of thousands of Walla's elite cavalry. Just how powerful were they? With the sudden return of an entire company of cold blade soldiers, Yang Qindong's strength had increased. If he wanted to force the Duke of Loyalty and Courage to admit his wrongs, the obstacles would be much greater. In this short period of time, Jinying's mind was filled with many thoughts. He suddenly felt that arranging for Hu Shao to force Yang Qindong to admit his wrongs to the Japanese emissary was an unwise move. What he needed to do now was to stop the emperor's actions. But just as he was thinking this, Zhu Qiyu called out Hu Zhao's name. Beloved official Hu, receiving the emissaries of other countries is the responsibility of your Ministry of Rights. As for the unpleasantness between the Duke of Loyalty and the Japanese emissary, we think that you should be responsible for it. In short, we need to resolve this problem in the shortest time possible. Right now, the great Ming does not need war. Do you understand? He suddenly called out Hu Zhao's name and handed over the task that was previously agreed to be handed over to censorate official Dong Chanhua. The expressions of all the officials changed slightly at this moment. In the imperial court, where intelligent people gathered, each of them had their own thoughts. Hu Shao had been an old official for many dynasties and had seen many storms and waves. As soon as Zhu Qiyu spoke, he guessed what had happened. He thought of the news that he had received yesterday, saying that Deputy Censorate of the left, Dong Chanhua, had returned to the palace with a furious expression not long after entering Yang village. He could already imagine what had happened. Could it be that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had defied the imperial edict? But did he really have the guts to do so? Also, could the Emperor of Loyalty and Courage really endure it? This was a great crime of defying an imperial edict. That would result in the confiscation of his property and the execution of 3 generations of his family. Depending on the severity of the situation, the execution of 9 generations of his family was not impossible. Hu Shao and the other officials all had their heads lowered as they thought about something. The atmosphere in the imperial court became incomparably stifling. As the emperor, Zhu Qiyu naturally didn't want the officials' hearts to be in chaos. If their hearts were in chaos, they wouldn't be able to do anything. He immediately explained with a smile on his face, "Beloved officials, there is no need to think too much. Our Duke of Loyalty and Courage is too rule-abiding. He said that he needed an official of the same rank to talk to him. Beloved official Dong's status is a bit too low. This is also because we didn't think about it clearly before. Therefore, this time we sent beloved official who is of the same rank, to give Duke of Loyalty and Courage enough face, ha ha ha." After the explanation was given, many of the officials immediately came to a realization. But as for what everyone was thinking, perhaps only they knew in their hearts. When did an imperial edict need an official of the same rank? This was clearly the emperor borrowing Hu Zhao's hand to suppress Yang Qindong. As a result, if Yang Qindong didn't lower his head, Hu Zhao wouldn't be able to explain himself. At that time, he would be accused of being unfilial. It was truly a good method. Among them, the one with an ugly expression was Dong Chanhua, who was standing in the group of officials. Seeing that the emperor's imperial favor was in his hands and that he had successfully ascended to the position, but his task had been messed up and he had been notified to all of his colleagues. It was easy to imagine how bad his mood was. But the only thing that was worth consoling was that this time, Yang Qindong didn't just slap his face, but also the emperor's face. Presumably, in order to return this slap, it wouldn't be long before the imperial edict promoting him to a second-rank official was issued. This was also why Zhu Qiyu wanted to use this matter to tell all of the officials that as long as they wholeheartedly worked for him, he would get back at them even if they were wronged. And for Dong Chanhua, this was very likely a blessing in disguise. Among the officials, the one with an ugly expression was Hu Zhao. Chapter 284. Even though Zhu Qiyu had already explained it to him, he could tell that something was different from what he had heard. Since ancient times, who would care about the identity of the person who gave the decree? Usually, when a first-rank official was ordered to do something, wouldn't a small eunuch be able to read the decree? Then why was it that when it came to Yang Qindong, there was a need for someone of the same rank to read the decree? How could things be so simple? It was clear that the emperor knew that he was Yang Qindong's elder and wanted to bully him. If this was really the case, if he didn't do this task well, not only would he attract the emperor's anger, it would also be equivalent to handing the knife to someone else. Knowing that this was the case, there was no other choice. This was what made Hu Zhao annoyed and helpless. If he didn't do it, it would attract trouble. If he did it, Yang Qindong would have to lower his head. But would he lower his head? Even if he lowered his head because of his identity as Hu Zhao's grandfather, would he be willing to do it? Would he hate him because of this? Hu Zhao's expression changed again and again. It could be said that his heart was full of worry. Zhu Qiyu naturally noticed it from the corner of his eyes, but he didn't pay attention to it. Who told you to be the elder of the loyal and bold duke? Who told the loyal and bold duke to have the courage to resist the imperial decree? If I didn't make things difficult for you, you really wouldn't know that imperial power was inviolable. Seeing Hu Zhao's calm expression and slightly squinting eyes, as if he was shocked, Zhu Qiyu's mood became very good. Yesterday, he had the same expression. Now that he had transferred it to someone else, how could he not be happy? Unfortunately, this happiness only lasted for less than half a cup of tea's time. An urgent report suddenly sounded outside the main hall, causing his attention to be completely diverted. Reporting it's urgent. A soldier of the great Ming dynasty with a messenger flag behind him rushed into the main hall of the imperial palace. According to the law of the great Ming dynasty, a messenger could enter the palace hall to report without an imperial edict. Therefore, when this great Ming soldier bravely rushed in, he was not stopped by anyone. There were only a few people who looked at him with surprise. Since the messenger had appeared here and said that it was an emergency, something urgent must have happened. However, there didn't seem to be any information that indicated that something big was going to happen. In front of the confused eyes of all the officials, and even Zhu Qiyu, the messenger knelt down in the main hall and reported without raising his head. Reporting to Your Majesty, a large number of Japanese samurai suddenly appeared at the port of Tianjin. They suddenly appeared and caught the garrison unprepared. Before this subordinate came to report, thousands of soldiers had been captured and countless military supplies had been robbed. The other party's strength is valiant and their battle prowess is extremely strong. My general requests the emperor to quickly send reinforcements. After saying that, Bing Yong kowtowed to the ground to express his impatience. What? That's impossible. Many of the officials immediately voiced their doubts. These people were the ones who had received gifts from Kimura Yoshida. They knew very well that not punishing Yang Qindong was just an excuse for the other party. As for whether they would really send troops, most likely this person couldn't make the decision. Even if they really wanted to send troops, they couldn't have done it so quickly. Where was this emissary and the capital? How could Japan go to war without declaring war? What did he mean? What's impossible about it? Seeing the expressions of disbelief on the faces of many officials, Suyojin, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, reacted quickly and shouted loudly. Can't you see that this is probably a delaying tactic by the Japanese emissary? They have been in the capital of our great Ming dynasty for some time. They know that we have just experienced several battles, and our military strength is weak. Jumping out at this time is obviously to take advantage of us. It's hateful that we were so gullible and didn't take any precautions. As he spoke, Suyojin shook his head with some resentment, as if he was angry at his lack of vigilance. But in fact, this statement was notified to him by the Security Bureau last night. That was to say, among all the officials, he was the only one who knew the truth. As mentioned before, Suyojin was a powerful official of a generation in history. Those who could become powerful officials were all people with means and ambition. If such people were used well, they would become a sharp sword that could cut everything. But in the same way, if they were not used well, it was likely that they would hurt themselves. In order to achieve the purpose of using this sword well, Yang Qindong deliberately told Suyojin in advance. This was also to deter him and let Suyojin know his strength, but he couldn't see it clearly. In this way, this person didn't dare to disobey his orders and would do things for him wholeheartedly. This was why Suyojin suddenly jumped out and revealed the truth. Suyojin's words were very much in the hearts of several officials. They all nodded in agreement, as if all this was really a delaying tactic by the Japanese emissary. Japanese samurai? How many of them are there? How is their combat strength? When did this happen? When Jining suddenly heard the news, his expression changed dramatically. But he also didn't believe that the Japanese would make a move at this time. Because, in his opinion, even if they wanted to make a move, they had to wait until after Yang Qindong was punished. He had a feeling that there was something fishy about this matter, but he couldn't think of any problem. So he asked this question. If the enemy had too few soldiers, could it be the work of mercenaries? This wasn't the first time he had interacted with Lung Feng. The enemy didn't have many people, but their combat strength was extraordinary. Moreover, the Tianjin garrison was not on guard. If they attacked by surprise, it was very likely that they would succeed. Since someone had asked a question, the messenger naturally had to answer it. Replying to Sir Eunuch, it happened a few days ago. Many Japanese samurai came, and from a distance they seemed to blot out the sky. Moreover, it happened so suddenly that my general could only retreat while fighting. After he was unable to turn the situation around, he ordered this lowly one to come find reinforcements. The Tianjin garrison's general did not immediately come to the capital to ask for reinforcements. What he reported was that he wanted to fight with the Japanese samurai. Because of this, the military situation was delayed, and the report only reached the capital a day later. Blot out the sky? Jean Ying's expression turned even uglier when he heard this description. Could it be that he was wrong, and this wasn't the work of mercenaries? Otherwise, how could there be so many soldiers? If the number of mercenaries really did blot out the sky, no one would be able to stop them. Jean Ying's expression changed greatly. Who among the other courtiers did not have the same expression? Could it be that Japan really had mobilized its army to loot a burning house? Of course, they didn't know that on the battlefield, unless the two sides were actually fighting or there was an advance report, it was very difficult to accurately determine the strength of the other side's army. Just like this time, it was clearly the work of mercenaries, but Commander Gao Xiong had personally led 400 elites from the Lung Feng Navy to the Tianjin garrison, accompanied by 2,000 auxiliary soldiers from Chichen City. For the sake of bluffing, Gao Xiong had intentionally sent out many banners so that from a distance it would appear that the entire harbor was covered in flags. This made it very easy for people to mistake it for an army. No one had imagined that this was a smokescreen set up by Yang Qindong. Everyone only knew that the Tianjin garrison wasn't far from the capital, and if they couldn't effectively stop the enemy from approaching, another battle to defend the capital would probably begin. At that time, the victor would be obvious. Quick, which beloved official is willing to lead soldiers into battle? Zhu Qiyu didn't want another battle to defend the capital. Last time, he had spent the young master's money, which had already caused him great heartache. Now, before he could recover from his shock, another unknown battle had appeared. While he was angry, his gaze also fell on the generals in the imperial court, lingering for the longest time on Marquis Wukinghao Shiheng. Shiheng was the general of the army, and he was also the commander in charge of building and training the new army. In the army, his strength was naturally a cut above the others. But even though he had been on the battlefield many times and had very few victories, his heart was beating like a drum. It was not the first time that he had heard the name of Japanese samurai. They were simply outlaws, and all of them were brave and good at fighting. It was said that if one wanted to become a samurai, he had to go through hundreds of selections. If he were to deal with such a powerful army, how confident would he be in winning? If he won, everything would be fine. But if he lost, would his position in the army be affected? His position was stable enough now. Did he still need to take risks and fight? The answer was, of course, no longer. There was no benefit in winning, and if he lost, he would lose his high position. Shaking his head, Shiheng looked awkwardly at Zhu Qiyu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, and knelt down. "Your Majesty, the new army has just been formed and hasn't undergone any training. If we send them to the battlefield at this time, I'm afraid that they will lose more than they will win." Zhu Qiyu really wanted to reprimand Shiheng, but when he thought about what Shiheng said, he realized that Shiheng was right. If he really sent the untrained new army to the battlefield and suffered a great defeat, it would directly threaten his throne. What should we do? Dear ministers, do you have any other candidates to recommend? Zhu Qiyu's tone changed. He no longer stared at Shiheng, but looked at the ministers, hoping that they could come up with another result. Even Shiheng had refused, which was enough to prove that the situation was tricky. Although some of the generals were a little restless after hearing this, they considered that if they lost, not only would they be implicated, but their families would also be implicated. For a moment, they could not help but shut their mouths, lower their heads, and act like ostriches. The originally noisy hall suddenly became quiet. The ministers looked at each other, speechless. Chapter 285. This scene infuriated Zhu Qiyu to no end. When there were benefits to be had, these officials didn't behave like this. They were all eager to show that they were capable, that they could be entrusted with important tasks, and that they could accomplish great things. But now that there was a problem that involved life and death, everyone had the same attitude. They would hide as much as they could. He really didn't know what he could do in the future by relying on such officials. Minister Yi, tell me, now that the Japanese army has invaded our borders, what is the Ministry of War planning to do? Since no one took the initiative to step forward, Zhu Qiyu simply began to call out names. The first to be called was the Minister of War, Ming. Since the incident just now, when the messenger knelt on the ground, Ming had lowered his head like an ostrich. If he didn't raise his head, no one would pay attention to him. But now that Zhu Qiyu had called out his name, he knew that he couldn't avoid it. He could only raise his head and say helplessly, "Your Majesty, after several battles, the Ministry of War doesn't have any good generals or elite soldiers. Moreover, we've been busy building a new army. We really don't have the strength to do anything." Useless. In his anger, Zhu Qiyu didn't care about the other party's face and exploded. "Other beloved officials? Do you have any suitable candidates to recommend?" The emperor was angry, and the other officials were all afraid to avoid him. At this moment, who would dare to answer? Looking for trouble? So when this question was asked, the entire hall fell silent. What? No one has a suitable candidate. Do you want us to personally lead the army? Zhu Qiyu stood up from the dragon throne, his voice filled with boundless anger. These officials are incompetent. Seeing that the emperor was so angry, all the officials knelt on the ground and blamed themselves. But when everyone knelt, there was one person who didn't kneel. He was the one who always came up with ideas, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Su Yozhen. Your Majesty, this official has a candidate to recommend. Seeing that only Su Yozhen had stepped forward, Zhu Qiyu's eyes were filled with hope. Beloved official Su, what candidate do you have? Quickly tell me. This official recommends the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, Yang Qindong. Su Yozhen's expression did not change as he spoke without panting, using his calmness to pacify the agitated Zhu Qiyu. Duke of Loyalty and Courage? Zhu Qiyu had an expectant look on her face, but what she got in return was a sharp intake of breath. He had just reprimanded Yang Qindong and asked him to apologize to the Japanese envoy. In return, Yang Qindong disobeyed the imperial edict. For this reason, he had just arranged for Hu Xiao to reprimand the other party a second time to save face and emphasize his imperial power. But now he needed Hu Xiao's help. Looking at it this way, wasn't he wrong? Wasn't he slapping himself in the face? He thought that if he had not ordered Dong Chanhua to reprimand Yang Qindong, he could have blamed the war on Yang Qindong. After all, it was true that Yang Qindong had smashed the gate of the Japanese emissary's courtyard. But now, if he had reprimanded Yang Qindong, wouldn't it mean that he had already been punished? Moreover, the capital had been targeting the Duke of Zhongdan recently, and Yang Qindong had said that Japan was a friendly country and would not do anything to them? And wasn't all of this a slap to his face? While Zhu Qiyu was still reflecting. I second the motion. After Su Yozhen recommended Yang Qindong, the Minister of Revenue, Wang Ji, immediately stood up and expressed his position. At the same time, he couldn't help but look at the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice in a new light. He found that this person could always do amazing things at critical times. For example, when the Walla army arrived, he recommended Yang Qindong. It turned out that his approach was right, and when it came to wartime, the first person who thought of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was this person. But when it came to peaceful times, this person always made trouble for Yang Qindong. Suddenly, he couldn't see through him. I second the motion. The Duke of Loyalty and the mercenaries have a very good relationship. Once he can be asked to help, the Japanese samurai will be defeated in one blow like the Walla cavalry. The Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao, also stood up at this time. He not only seconded the motion, but also expressed his opinion. A left assistant minister and two ministers simultaneously recommended Yang Qindong. This made Zhu Qiyu's expression even more unsightly. In his heart, he knew that if he used Yang Qindong, the matter of the Tianjin garrison would be resolved. But this person's contributions were too great. If he was given a chance, how would he be rewarded after the war? Even now, he dared to defy the imperial decree. Wouldn't he rebel in the future? No, he absolutely couldn't give this person a chance. His gaze intentionally avoided Su Yozhen and the others. Zhu Qiyu said in a very resolute voice, Commander Shiheng, listen up. I order you to start preparing. Within 3 days, send 50,000 soldiers to the Tianjin garrison to eliminate the ethnic disturbances. There must be no mistakes. Order the embroidered uniform guards and the Eastern faction guards to immediately surround the Japanese diplomatic mission. Detain them first, then hand them over to the Ministry of Rights. In the end, Zhu Qiyu made the decision not to use Yang Qindong. He didn't care whether Shiheng agreed or not. He directly made the decision in the name of an imperial edict. When His Highness issued an imperial edict, even if Shiheng was 1,000 times unwilling, he still had to obey. He didn't have Yang Qindong's ability to dare defy an imperial edict. Just like that, the court assembly dispersed. After Zhu Qiyu walked out of the main hall, followed by a group of eunuchs, Hu Shao followed the other officials outside at a leisurely pace. Not far away, his eldest son, Hu Changning, hurried over. "Father, are you preparing to go to the Yang clan manor?" "What for?" Hu Shao asked with a suspicious expression. Did His Majesty arrange for father to reprimand the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, and have him do what? Haha. Japan went to war without declaring war. At this moment, there's no reason for us to apologize to them. Thus, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is already innocent. Didn't you hear His Majesty say that the Japanese diplomatic mission needs to be handed over to the Ministry of Rights to be judged? This is His Majesty's attitude. Wang Ji, the minister of the Ministry of Personnel, was walking beside Hu Shao. He immediately explained with a smile. After hearing this argument, Hu Changning realized that he had thought too much. He immediately bowed his head and cupped his hands in embarrassment. "I see. Thank you, Uncle Wang, for your advice. You don't have to thank me. Even if this old official didn't say this, you can think clearly about this small matter. Alas, it's just that sending Shi Hung to lead the new army that hasn't been trained to deal with the Japanese samurai is really a somewhat righteous act." Wang Ji shook his head lightly. He was not worried about whether Hu Zhongning could figure out the crux of the matter in a short period of time. This person had a good father and a good son-in-law. He did not have the guts to suffer losses. However, Zhu Qiyu's decision to not let Yang Qindong take command, but to let Shi Hung go, was really worrying. "Minister Wang, you don't have to worry about this. Japan is just a small country. It can't make any waves. Even if Shi Hung is temporarily trapped with strong manpower and material support, it's not impossible to win this battle. Besides, isn't there still the Duke of Loyalty and Courage? At worst, we'll just suffer losses first. By the way, hasn't the imperial court suffered a lot in the past 2 years?" Hu Shao stroked his beard and shook his head. Obviously, he was also somewhat dissatisfied with Zhu Qiyu's decision, but he wasn't too worried. After all, it was a small country that was really difficult to put in his eyes. Perhaps, but it's unwise to send so many soldiers to the battlefield for the sake of face. How could Wang Ji not understand this truth? But when he thought about the consequences of the new soldiers going to the battlefield, what kind of losses it would cause and how many families would be destroyed, he still felt distressed. Zhu Qiyu did not hesitate to lose the new army for the sake of face. In his eyes, Yang Qindong's contribution was too great. It was so great that if he wasn't suppressed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even so, as long as there was another way, he would try it. Even if he knew that he would have to pay a price, he had to do it. He couldn't send Yang Qindong every time a war broke out, right? Besides, the great Ming dynasty couldn't even find a good commander to lead the army. As soon as the court meeting ended, all kinds of news spread. What was worth mentioning was that the Japanese envoy Kimura Yoshida actually heard the news in an instant. When he first heard the news, his face was full of disbelief. Not to mention that Japan originally had no intention to fight with the great Ming dynasty. His previous words were just to pressure them. Even if the country sent troops, it was impossible for them not to inform him. Otherwise, how could they trap him? Is there any misunderstanding in this matter? Could it be that the news from the front was wrong? What if the people who appeared were not our samurai, but someone else who pretended to be them? Kimura Yoshida had a doubtful expression on his face as he asked Qishang, the guard who sent the news. Seeing that the envoy was still doubting the source of the news, Qishang anxiously said, "Kimura-sama, now is not the time to think about this. Presumably, someone is already coming here. The first thing we should do now is to leave this place. No matter what, we cannot be caught by them. Then we will go to the Tianjin Guard. If it is really our samurai, we will join them and send troops to the capital. Then we will ask them to release the other people of the diplomatic mission and compensate them. If it is not, then we need to find evidence to explain it to the Ming Emperor. Good. Hearing Qi Shang's suggestion, Kimura Yoshida nodded repeatedly. But is there still a chance to escape? Presumably. There is no time to leave through the gate, right? Kimura-sama, do you still remember the tunnel you asked me to dig? It was completed last night. We can leave from there without anyone knowing. Qi Shang's face was full of confidence. Because he didn't know the Ming Emperor's attitude, and for his own safety, he had already made some preparations. Now was the time to put them to good use. Good. Ichikuin, you have done well. Let's leave. As soon as he heard that the tunnel was finished, Kimura Yoshida's face showed a satisfied expression. Chapter 286. Good. Please follow me. Aikishang nodded. In order not to attract attention, the two didn't bring anyone else with them. They only took some silver and entered the tunnel, leaving the diplomatic mission's courtyard. Less than half an incense stick's worth of time after the two left. A large number of embroidered uniform guards and Dongchang Fanzi appeared outside the Japanese diplomatic mission's courtyard. The one who came to carry out the mission was the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Ji Guang. He first asked his subordinates who had been guarding the door, "How is it? Is there anything unusual inside?" "No, we didn't see anyone come out." "Good. Everyone listen to my orders. In a moment, we will charge in and arrest everyone. Anyone who dares to resist will be killed." After Ji Guang gave the order to his subordinates, he waved his hand and broke the door open. As the embroidered uniform guards entered, the diplomatic mission's courtyard was soon filled with the sound of weapons clashing. In the face of the sudden appearance of the heavenly soldiers, the Japanese did not choose to surrender. Instead, they tenaciously resisted. However, due to the disadvantage in numbers, in just half an hour, the Japanese were dead, injured, and captured. After the battle, the courtyard was filled with the smell of blood. However, the embroidered uniform guards seemed to be used to such scenes. They lightly counted the number of captives while looking for the enemy's leader. After a while, the former envoy Aoki Yuki was found. However, Kimura Yoshida and his guard, Aikishang, were missing. "Master Ji Guang, we found a tunnel that leads to the neighboring street outside. There are traces of people walking on it. It should be the missing Kimura Yoshida and Aikishang." An embroidered uniform guard stepped forward and respectfully reported to Ji Guang. "Want to run? Pass down the order to strictly check the city gates. They must not be allowed to escape." Ji Guang said with a gloomy face. An important person had actually escaped. This was a dereliction of duty. Of course, if the two of them escaped, wouldn't it mean that they had a guilty conscience? Kimura Yoshida and Aikishang used the tunnel to walk out of the neighboring street. When they finally walked out of the dark and damp tunnel, they could breathe a breath of fresh air. A thunderous voice fell in their ears. "How is it? The tunnel doesn't feel good, right? Tie them up." The one who spoke was Yang Wu. He had been waiting here on Yang Qindong's orders since last night. Although Ming did not notice the digging of the tunnel, the Security Bureau, who had already bribed the cook of the diplomatic mission, discovered the problem. How did the diplomatic corps, which did not do any work or training, suddenly increase their appetite and purchase many iron tools and bamboo baskets for digging tunnels? Yang Qindong had once taught him that any small matter could become a big matter. It all depended on whether or not it could attract your attention. After Yang San received the news, he increased the intensity of his investigation. Naturally, the matter of the underground tunnel did not escape his eyes. Thus, Yang Wu's actions came about. When the steel knife was on his neck, Kimura Yoshida still said arrogantly, "What are you doing? Am I a Japanese emissary? If you kill me, wouldn't that incite a war between the two countries? Can you bear such a sin?" "Sai, you talk a lot of nonsense." Yang Wu shook his head. This kind of threat was nothing to him. If not for the 6 young masters ordered to keep him alive, he would have killed him long ago. However, just because he could not kill him did not mean he could not vent his anger. He raised his hand and struck Kimura Yoshida's neck. The powerful force immediately knocked him out. Qishang, who was beside him, shrunk back in fear. Qishang's reaction fell into Yang Wu's eyes. Seeing how cowardly Qishang was, he could not help but glare. This glare scared Qishang out of his 7 souls. "Don't do it, I'll knock myself out." As he spoke, Qishang slammed his head against the wall in front of him. His entire body was bleeding from his head and he fainted. At least he knows what's good for him. I originally wanted to teach him a lesson, but unfortunately I can't. Seeing that Qishang had knocked himself out, Yang Wu sighed and said with dissatisfaction, "Brother Wu, why don't you just kill him?" Lang Feng, who came with Yang Wu to carry out the mission, suggested when he saw that Yang Wu was not satisfied. "Forget it. There's no point in killing someone who has already fainted. Let's bring him back to the young master and let him do whatever he wants with him. Let's go, put them in a carriage, and transport them out of the city. I'm afraid it won't be long before this matter is discovered and the city gates will be strictly checked." Yang Wu did not dare to delay. He was afraid that there would be a mistake and delay the young master's important matters. If that happened, he could not afford to be punished. The carriage that had already been prepared rushed over. After throwing the 2 unconscious people into the carriage, it headed towards the Yongding Gate. Not long after Yang Wu and the others left the city, the inspection at the city gates became much stricter. Under Ji Guang's personal supervision, even the carriages of the nobles and officials had to be strictly checked. However, this was destined to be ineffective. In the Yang family manor, Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami were thrown into the basement that had already been dug. In the academy, Junko was originally studying. The miscellaneous knowledge taught by Yang Qindong made her indulge in it. She realized that the world was so big, whether it was the great Ming dynasty or Japan, they were just a part of it, not even 1/20th of it. This made her open her eyes, and at the same time, she was more certain that Yang Qindong was extraordinary. When she was studying seriously, Beta Persei appeared. "Miss Junko, our young master wants to see you." Beta Persei was second only to Tiger's mane beside Yang Qindong. His presence here itself represented Yang Qindong. Junko naturally did not doubt him and walked out of the classroom and came to the front of Yang Qindong in the inner courtyard. "Let's go, I'll take you to see 2 people." After seeing Junko, Yang Qindong smiled, and then very gentlemanly made a gesture of invitation and took Junko to the basement. With Yang Qindong's identity, it was not surprising that there would be a basement in the manor. What Junko was curious about was who she was going to see. When she came down the stairs to the basement and saw the unconscious Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami, she couldn't help but turn pale. She couldn't understand how these 2 people were brought here. Weren't they the emissaries of Japan? How could Dong Shuai be so bold? Wasn't he afraid of being tracked down? Junko's face changed again and again. Yang Qindong didn't care about these things and just casually nodded to Beta Persei. At this time, Beta Persei took a wooden bucket that had been prepared and poured it on the unconscious Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami. Under the water column, the 2 people were instantly awakened. When they slowly opened their eyes, they saw Yang Qindong and Princess Junko. As soon as the 2 people opened their eyes, Junko didn't wait for Yang Qindong's consent and quickly said in Japanese, "Don't expose this princess's identity. Otherwise, I will let Dong Shuai kill you now." In such a situation, Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami could only nod their heads repeatedly in order to survive. On the other hand, Yang Qindong on the side had already understood the conversation, but he still pretended not to know anything and looked at Junko, seemingly waiting for her explanation. "Oh, nothing. I just told them to answer Dong Shuai's question honestly." Junko found a promise to make. Junko didn't want to disclose her identity so Yang Qindong didn't point out. Instead, he turned his gaze back to Kimura Yoshida and Beta Persei and asked in pure Chinese, "Didn't you always want to kill me? Now I'm standing in front of you. Do it?" On the left side of Yang Qindong was Beta Persei, and on the right side was Yang Wu. The two people were staring at him with fierce eyes, so Kimura Yoshida didn't dare to move. He shook his head and said, "Duke Xiongdan, I think all of this is a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. Yang Qindong chuckled and said, "You should know that because of your threat, the emperor of the great Ming dynasty actually wanted this duke to apologize to you. But this duke didn't agree and almost carried the crime of disobeying the imperial decree. If it weren't for your sudden attack on the Tianjin guard of the great Ming dynasty, I'm afraid I would have bowed my head to you now." "What? That's impossible." Junko originally didn't know where Yang Qindong got the courage to arrest these two people, and what was the point of arresting them. But now, when she heard that the Japanese army had declared war on the great Ming dynasty, her eyes suddenly widened, and she couldn't believe it. No, we don't mean to be enemies with the great Ming dynasty, and we won't send any army to attack. Everything is a misunderstanding. I was just trying to scare your emperor." At this moment, Kimura Yoshida finally told the truth. Unfortunately, now that he had said something like that, no matter how one listened to it, it sounded like an explanation. Yang Qindong kept shaking his head after listening. "The facts are all there. The battle report of the Tianjin Guard has been sent to the capital. Do you still want to deny it?" "No. There must be some misunderstanding. It's likely that someone else is pretending to be you, intending to provoke a war between the two countries. Please investigate this matter. I'm also willing to go to the Tianjin Guard and confront the people there." Kimura Yoshida kept shaking his head, indicating that he didn't know anything. At the same time, in order to explain clearly, he was willing to confront the so-called Japanese samurai. Kimura Yoshida would make such a choice, which was exactly what Yang Qindong was worried about. That was why he kidnapped the two people here. He couldn't let the great Ming dynasty catch them. Otherwise, things were likely to be exposed. Fortunately, before he could do anything, the two people escaped through the tunnel, which saved him a lot of trouble. Yang Qindong naturally knew what was going on, and of course, he wouldn't admit that everything was arranged by him. Seeing that Kimura Yoshida didn't admit it, he pretended to be angry and said, "Very well, the facts are all there. If you still want to deny it, then I have to use some means." Chapter 287. As soon as Yang Qindong's words fell, Beta Persei and Yang Wu laughed and walked toward Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami. With the two's martial arts, they could easily injure their internal organs, but they would never let others see any injuries on the surface. Ah, it hurts. It hurts. Soon, Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami's painful howls came from the basement. In front of Beta Persei and Yang Wu, the two's so-called self-esteem was trampled on. It didn't take long for them to urinate and defecate, and the smell of filth filled the basement. Yang Qindong gently covered his mouth and nose, turned around and walked up and said, "Treat them well. When they confess, report to this young master." Junko followed Yang Qindong to the ground, but at this time she was a little distracted. Obviously, she didn't believe that Japan would send troops to invade the great Ming dynasty. At this time, although Japan was still led by the emperor because General Ashikaga Yoshimasa was too powerful, many things were not decided by her father. If the internal situation was unstable, how could they expand outward? Not to mention that they chose the powerful Ming dynasty. If Japan attacked a small country like Korea, Junko could still understand. After all, Japan's geographical environment was destined to make them have to go out if they wanted to achieve something. But why would they choose the great Ming dynasty? But Yang Qindong said that Japanese samurai raided the Tianjin garrison. How could this be explained? In such a matter, presumably this person would not speak without thinking. Junko had no idea in her heart. After separating from Yang Qindong, She found the captain of the guards, Kobayashi, and explained what she had just seen in the room on the ground. Kobayashi was also shocked by the news brought by Junko. Princess, is it fake? Your Royal Highness is still in the great Ming dynasty. Although your identity has not been exposed, once the war starts, I'm afraid it will be difficult to hide your identity. Wouldn't this put the princess in a disadvantageous position? No, you don't know the emperor. For the sake of Japan, my sacrifice is nothing. Junko shook her head with a bitter smile. Japan was originally a country where men were superior to women. There, men were the sky and could do anything. Women were completely an accessory. Even in the upper echelons of society, there was a tradition of sending women to each other. As long as everything was in line with benefits, it was normal to give one's young daughter to an old man. But let's run. Xiao Lin still wanted to say something. For example, he didn't even have any kinship left. Wasn't this a little too cruel? However, in the end, he didn't say anything. The identity of the emperor wasn't something a nobody like him could question. Therefore, he decided to escape with the princess. Since the great Ming dynasty and Japan were at war, there was no benefit for Princess Junko to stay here. Once his identity was exposed, he was afraid that he would become the biggest hostage and live a life worse than a dog's. Escape? Based on the fact that we are Japanese, where do you think we can escape now? I'm afraid that as soon as we leave Yang Village, we will be caught. Junko shook her head. Compared to the unfamiliar outside, Yang Village was extremely safe. But if we stay in Yang Village, there is no guarantee that Zhongdonggong won't do anything to us. Xiao Lin said worriedly. No, Zhongdonggong won't. Speaking of this, Junko remembered the unclear relationship between herself and Yang Qindong. She was very confident, but in the end, she still found an excuse and said, "We are just businessmen. If he wanted to, he would have done it long ago. Nothing happened for so long and nothing will happen now. I'm just worried that once Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami reveal my identity, then." Junko didn't continue speaking, but it was obvious that she was worried. "Your Highness, don't worry, I will go to the basement now and end them." Xiao Lin's face was firm. No, no. Junko shook her head again. "If you go and fail, I'm afraid that the Zhongdonggong will blame you or even kill you. Let me go." Junko seemed to have made a great decision. She thought that even if she failed and was discovered, with her beauty and the friendship between her and Yang Qindong, the other party wouldn't do anything to her. "But your Highness has never killed anyone," Xiao Lin said worriedly. "There is a first time for everything." Junko shook her head and looked at Xiao Lin. "Korean Kuin, I know you have a very sharp dagger. Give it to me." "This." "Okay." Xiao Lin didn't dare to disobey the princess's order. The most important thing was that this was indeed the best way to hide their identity. He immediately agreed, pulled out a shining dagger from his leg and handed it to Junko. Yang Qindong went out of the basement and came to the study. After a while, Beta Persei came in. "Young master," Miss Junko went to the basement. "Oh, she didn't discover you?" Yang Qindong said without the slightest surprise, as if everything was within his calculations. Junko was afraid that her identity would be exposed, and someone would use her identity as a princess to make a fuss. So the best way was, of course, to silence them. "No, Yangwu and I hid very well, and now Yangwu is watching," Beta Persei replied in a low voice. Speaking of which, not only was he tall, but his voice was also like thunder, which often scared people. For this matter, Yang Qindong reminded him a lot, so when he saw the sixth young master, he had to speak in a fake voice. "Okay, then let's go watch the show." Yang Qindong stood up with a smile and went straight out of the study. In the basement, Junko held a sharp dagger in her hand, enduring the unpleasant smell, and came to the front of Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami, who had fainted on the ground. After Yang Air and Yang Wu's torment, the two of them were already in a state worse than death. They were in so much pain that they wished they were dead. Even when Junko came near, they did not sense anything. Looking at these two compatriots, who are also the trusted subordinates of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who is a headache for her father emperor, Junko can't help but feel angry. How dare they be so bold to suddenly send troops to the great Ming dynasty? How could they not know that the current great Ming dynasty was not something that Japan could afford to provoke? This was simply asking for trouble. Thinking that it was because of their wrong judgment that it was likely to lead Japan into the war and greatly weaken the national strength, Junko raised the dagger in her hand with resentment and then suddenly stabbed Kimura Yoshida, who was closest to her, in the chest. Puchi! After the dagger entered the body, there was only a muffled sound, and Kimura Yoshida died and went to see the emperor. After killing one person, Junko seemed to be interested and forgot her fear. She raised the dagger and stabbed the heart of the other guard, Ikigami. Puchi, Puchi! As if she was afraid that she would not be able to kill the other party. Under her anger, she continuously stabbed the other party several times. In the end, she killed the two of them until they could no longer kill each other. Blood also sprayed onto her face and clothes, but she did not seem to care about it. Until she confirmed that the two people were dead, she dragged her tired body and walked out of the underground room. Furthermore, all of this had happened without anyone stopping him. It was as if it had happened without anyone knowing. But Junko didn't know that there was a very hidden room on the side of the basement. There seemed to be an earthen wall, but in fact it was just a disguise. There was a double-sided transparent glass that was taller than it would be a few hundred years later. From there, one could clearly see everything that was happening in the basement. Looking from the inside to the outside, there was nothing unusual. Did you record it? Yang Qindong looked at Beta Persei, who was fiddling with the camera for the first time. Young master, it's all recorded. According to your request, I also recorded a few close-ups to clearly record the scene of Junko killing the two Japanese envoys. Beta Persei said as if he was showing off. Very good. Arrange for someone to send it to Commander Gao Xiong, and then let him arrange for someone to send it to Japan. Remember, you must personally send it to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Yang Qindong said with confidence. He never had any good impression of Japan. It was only a matter of time before he dealt with them. And before that, in order to achieve his goal more easily, internal strife was one of the best ways. He believed that with this solid evidence, Ashikaga Yoshimasa could use it to attack the emperor, and Japan's internal strife was already a fact. At that time, it would be impossible for Junko not to stand on his side. Speaking of which, after knowing Junko's identity, Yang Qindong had always had a plan, and step by step it was carried out smoothly until now it finally paid off. With this video as evidence, he didn't have to worry about Japan's internal strife. At that time, his opportunity would come, and he could even send troops to Japan on the grounds of supporting Junko's restoration. At that time, it wouldn't be difficult to occupy the entire Japan and make it return to its ancestral land. Junko didn't know these things. On the contrary, after killing people, she thought that no one would find her. After returning to her room, she quickly changed into a clean set of clothes and went to the academy. She really did what she should do. There were no side effects or discomfort after killing people for the first time. Yang Qindong also acted as if nothing had happened. It's just that the scene of Junko killing Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami has been recorded perfectly. Not only that, he also took a copy of it to the warehouse and then took out a copy and a tablet that could play the video. When the time comes, he only needed to take it to Japan and play it. Presumably, it would cause an uproar. It was equivalent to handing General Ashikaga Yoshimasa a butcher's knife so that he could raise it high and do whatever he wanted. Chapter 288. Because the Japanese samurai suddenly attacked the port of Tianjin, Yang Qindong's so-called crime of disobeying the imperial edict was not pursued. Since they had already made their move, there was no point in asking the Duke of Loyalty to make any more promises. The Yang village quieted down. Yang Qindong was his own teacher at the Yang Academy. From time to time, he would interact with the students and discuss some problems that people could not solve at that time. When he returned to the inner courtyard of the Yang village, he interacted with the several madams, thinking of ways to create the next generation. In contrast to Yang Qindong's leisure, the commander-in-chief in the capital, Shi Hung, was so busy that his feet did not touch the ground. The emperor only gave him 3 days to gather 50,000 soldiers and send them to Tianjin. However, most of these soldiers had not undergone systematic training. Most of them came to the military camp on the basis of their hot-bloodedness. Many of them were even influenced by Yang Qindong and joined the army. However, it would be very difficult for these people to win a battle. After Shi Hung returned to the army, he issued the order to prepare for war and allowed everyone to take the initiative to sign up. The result of this action could be said to be the result of breaking his heart. According to the amount of money Zhu Qiu had given them, the number of new recruits this time was close to 200,000. However, when the order to prepare for war was issued, there were not even 5,000 people who took the initiative to sign up. Looking at the statistics, Shi Hung said angrily to his subordinates, "Since they don't take the initiative to sign up, then force them to do it. As for how to do it, you can decide for yourselves. In short, at this time tomorrow, I want to see 50,000 soldiers ready to go to war." After throwing these words to his subordinates, Shi Hung went straight to the Ministry of Justice. Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami had escaped and even disappeared without a trace. However, the previous envoy, Aoki Yuki, was still caught by the genie guards and was now locked up in the prison of the Ministry of Justice. Shi Hung came to see Aoki Yuki to get more information, such as how many soldiers Japan had sent this time, who was the commander, and what his personality was like. One had to say that Aoki Yuki was rather unlucky. First, he failed to assassinate Princess O'Hara Junko, and then Yang Qindong found an opportunity to accuse him of disturbing the peace of the capital and assassinating an important official, after which he was arrested by the Bureau of Rights and imprisoned for several months. Finally, Kimura Yoshida appeared and rescued him, but in just a few days he was caught again. He had nothing to say except for lamenting his bad luck. Not only did he accept his fate, but he also didn't know what to say when faced with the torture tools of the Ministry of Justice. He really didn't know anything about the sudden appearance of the Japanese army in Tianjin, or how many people had come, or who the general was. Faced with all kinds of torture instruments that he could not name, although he was extremely afraid, he still did not say the answer that Shi Hung wanted in the end. It seems that he really doesn't know. Shi Hung personally saw the scene of Aoki Yuki being tortured. Aoki Yuki only shouted that he was wronged and fainted twice, but he still didn't say anything valuable. He couldn't help shaking his head angrily and said, "Forget it. Since that's the case, it's useless to keep this person alive. Just kill him and let the army use him as a sacrifice." Normally, when two countries go to war, envoys are not to be killed. However, Japan went to war without declaring war, and Aoki Yuki did not appear as a true envoy. So even if he was killed, it would still be reasonable. Just after Shi Hung said this, Aoki Yuki, who was still a little dizzy, suddenly shouted loudly, "No, you can't kill me. I know that an important person of our Japanese royal family is in the capital of the great Ming dynasty. I know it." "Oh, is there such a thing?" Originally, Qin Haodong didn't expect to scare him. He just wanted to kill him to boost the morale of the army. He didn't expect that he would force out such a big news, thinking that if he could find this important member of the royal family, he could not only learn more about the movements of the Japanese army, but also make the enemy hesitate to attack. Shi Hung's eyes suddenly lit up. He strode to Aoki Yuki and said, "Tell me, who is that person? Where is he now? I need to rest. I need someone to treat me. Otherwise, I won't say anything even if you kill me." Aoki Yuki took this opportunity to put forward his condition. Aoki Yuki had been injured twice. If he was not treated at this moment, he would bleed to death. Although Sher Hung wanted to know immediately, he knew that sometimes the will of a dying person could not be measured by ordinary means. He nodded immediately. I can ask someone to treat you right away. I can also give you good food and drink. I can even promise to let you continue to live. But remember, if you don't say his name and dare to play tricks on Marquis, I promise that you will beg for death. Humph! Come on, take him to be treated. Aoki Yuki finally survived, and as Sher Hung said, he ate well, drank well, and even had a good sleep. But early the next morning, when he just opened his eyes, he found Sher Hung standing in front of him in a suit of armor. From this, it could be seen that Sher Hung was already impatient. After seeing Aoki Yuki open his eyes, his voice immediately sounded in his ears. Marquis, whether you have rested well or not, and whether you want to say something or not, I only want to tell you one thing. I'll only tell you one thing. You have 10 breaths of time to tell me the identity and hiding place of that person. Otherwise, I'll kill you with a swing of my blade. After saying this with a cold face, Sher Hung pulled out his sharp waist saber and slowly moved it toward Aoki Yuki's neck. As he moved closer, he said, 10, 9, 8, 7. Cold sweat immediately flowed down Aoki Yuki's neck. He could feel that the other party wasn't just scaring him. He really wanted to kill him. At the same time, he began to think rapidly in his mind whether he should tell the other party that Junko was the princess. 3, 2. When he counted to 2, Aoki Yuki's body trembled. It was better to live than to die. Although he didn't know if he could survive after telling the other party, if he didn't say it, he was sure that he would die right now. Even if he could only live a little longer, it was still a glimmer of hope. He immediately shouted, I'll tell you. She is the daughter of our emperor, Princess Junko O'Hara. She is now in the Yang family manor. The army in the capital was gathering, and all kinds of useful information flew to Yang Qindong's desk like snowflakes. Yang Qindong shook his head when he saw that the 50,000 soldiers had already been selected. Most of them were poor soldiers who couldn't afford to send money to the Baihu and Qianhu because they didn't have the money or power to send them to the front lines. When 2 armies fought, no matter how good the timing, location, and people were, there was one thing that was more important, and that was the morale of the soldiers. If one didn't have this, no matter how many soldiers they had, they were likely to lose the battle. Fortunately, the opponent this time wasn't the real Japanese army, but the Yang family navy, led by Gao Xiong. They must be anxious because of the lack of manpower, and these 50,000 soldiers were sent to their doorstep. Of course, they wouldn't reject them. Pass this information to Commander Gao. At the same time, tell him to capture as many prisoners as possible. These people don't have any complicated backgrounds, and they are all useful people. Yang Qindong said to Tiger's Mane, and then handed over a stack of information. Hee, young master. This time Commander Gao will be very happy. Tiger's Mane thought that if they could capture these able-bodied men, it would greatly alleviate the problem of the lack of young men in Qiqian City. He couldn't help but smile and say, yes, he will be happy for a while. Yang Qindong also nodded with a smile on his face. Since they were forced to be selected, then those who had a little bit of background, and even those who were rich, wouldn't be included. This time, Sher Hung did a good thing and gave him so many good soldiers. Just as he thought of Sher Hang's name, Yang Wu's voice came from outside the study room. Young master, there is a large group of people outside the manor. It seems like there are soldiers, imperial guards, and some eunuchs. Yang Qindong, who suddenly heard the news, showed a puzzled expression in an instant. Now that the war was imminent, no one should care about him. But why did so many people come? If they were looking for trouble, then it didn't make sense. In front of an external enemy, the most taboo thing was internal instability. Who had the guts to look for trouble at this time? Young master, I will immediately send people to be on alert. Hearing that so many people came uninvited, Tiger's man's body was overflowing with murderous intent. Appropriate precautions will be enough. They don't have the guts to look for trouble with young master. Yang Qindong shook his head decisively. If someone really wanted to do something bad to him, they would definitely not choose this time. Anyone with a little brain should know that this was not the time for internal strife. When Yang Qindong heard the news, Shi Hung from the outer court of Yang Manor had already arrived with a large group of people. Aoki Yuki actually said that the daughter of the Emperor of Japan, Her Royal Highness, was in Yang Manor. This news made him excited and worried. He was excited because if the news was true, he could get more information about the enemy by capturing the princess. At the same time, he could use this to threaten the enemy not to act rashly. He was worried because this matter involved Yang Manor, which meant that it was related to the Duke of Loyalty. If the news was wrong and Aoki Yuki was talking nonsense, then he would become a gun in the hands of others. What a stupid thing to do. Shi Hung was very smart. Not only did he have his own methods to lead troops to war, but he also had his own set of standards in dealing with people. At least he knew who he could deal with, who he could offend, and who he shouldn't. Chapter 289. In his mind, Yang Qindong was one of those people that he couldn't afford to provoke, perhaps even the most important one. This was because this young man had achieved success at a young age, had a straightforward temper, and possessed considerable strength. If he were to offend him, it would truly be troublesome. Until his position was sufficiently stable, he didn't want to have anything unpleasant happen to him. Even in the imperial court, when everyone was impeaching Yang Qindong for his actions, he had cleverly refrained from taking a stand, only following the crowd. He didn't object, but he also didn't deliberately support anything. But this time, the matter that Aoki Yuki had brought up was far too important. So important that he would rather offend Yang Qindong than take the risk. Thus, he had come just so that he wouldn't push things too far. Not only had he come, he had also requested the imperial decree to invite the commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Hu Changning, and the imperial horse supervisor, Ru Zhu. He had invited Hu Changning because of his special relationship with Yang Qindong. With this person present, the matter wouldn't become so awkward that no one would be able to extricate themselves from the situation. He had invited Ru Zhu because he was one of His Majesty's subordinates. He wanted him to see everything so that His Majesty could better understand the situation. Outside the Yang clan manor, Shi Hung, Hu Changning, and Ru Zhu led a group of more than 100 people to stand in front of the manor. They allowed the servants of the Yang clan manor to enter and report, not showing the slightest hint of impatience on their faces. This alone was enough to express their sincerity. However, this kind of sincerity could only be given to Yang Qindong, the loyal duke. If it was any other minister, they would not enjoy such treatment. Once they had any doubts, they would directly kill their way in. How could they be so polite to you? Even if the other party was courteous, Yang Qindong couldn't just remain in the inner courtyard, and this wasn't even mentioning that his father-in-law was here. Under the protection of a group of mercenaries in camouflage uniforms, he came forward in a green robe. Camouflage uniforms held a special meaning in the eyes of important officials. Putting aside everything else, just the advanced firearms in their hands were enough to make countless people envious. But the only one in the capital who could truly command them was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. It was said that not even the emperor could afford to invite him. The camouflage uniform also represented an existence that could not be offended. This was because not only did they represent themselves, but they also had a powerful force behind them. If they really offended them, fought with them, and suffered casualties, then who knew if the army behind them would send a large army to deal with them? If it really came, would the great Ming dynasty be able to withstand it? These were all unknowns. It was precisely because of the unknown that no one dared to try. This made the army seem even more mysterious and powerful. Now, as soon as these mercenaries appeared, it could be seen that there was a commotion in Shi Hung's troops. It was obvious that not only the officials, but even the soldiers, knew how powerful these mercenaries were. Ha ha ha! I didn't know that the three of you would be honored by my presence. Please excuse me for not going out to meet you, Yang Qindong said as soon as he appeared and bowed to everyone. Everyone knew that this bow was for his father-in-law, Hu Zhongning, so other than him cupping his fists to return the bow, Shi Heng and Ru Zhu both smiled and did not say anything. After the salute, Yang Qindong still had a full smile on his face, but when he spoke his confidence was obviously a bit stronger. But I don't know why you came to my Yang family village and made such a big scene. What's the matter? Doubts always needed someone to solve them. When Shi Heng and Ru Zhu's eyes fell on Hu Zhongning, although he was unwilling, he could only open his mouth and say, Duke of Loyalty and Courage, the matter is like this. The former Japanese envoy Aoki, Yuki, pointed out that there is a very important person in Japan in our great Ming dynasty, and he is in the Yang village. This time, we came to take this person away. As soon as Hu Zhongning's words fell, Yang Qindong's eyebrows slightly furrowed at first, but then they quickly relaxed. He finally knew the purpose of the other party's visit. It seemed that the fact that Junko was the Princess of Japan had been exposed. Yang Qindong had already mentally prepared for this. After all, the fact that Junko was the Princess of Japan was not a secret. In addition, she was originally beautiful and was cultivated as a seed by the Emperor of Japan. There were too many people who knew her. It was too difficult for such a famous person to not be known by others. Fortunately, this person's value had been used when he killed Kimura Yoshida and Aikisheng yesterday. It was not a waste to keep him around for so long, but there were more important things that required Junko's cooperation in the future. How could he just hand her over like this? Not to mention, what kind of place was the Yang village? How could they allow others to take people away just like that? He was a little unwilling in his heart, but since his father-in-law said so, it was absolutely impossible to drive him away directly. He still had to give face. When he looked at his father-in-law, his eyes were full of smiles. So that's how it is. In that case, let's arrange for Junko to come here. Tiger's Mane, go and bring her out. Yes, young master. Tiger's Mane nodded and turned to leave. His mind was full of the look that Yang Qindong gave him, as if to remind him of something. When he considered that the young master treated Junko differently, he made a decision. That was to tell Junko everything, at least let her be mentally prepared first. As for whether she was the Princess of Japan or not, it was not a problem that he needed to consider at all. Tiger's Mane left to find Junko, and Yang Qindong waved his hand. Yang Wu and the others immediately placed a large table here, and someone served tea and 4 stools, as if they were here to entertain guests. On the surface, Yang Qindong seemed to welcome the arrival of Hu Zhongning and the others, but the way he treated them outside the door fully expressed the displeasure in his heart. Since they had come uninvited, then there was no need for them to enter the manor. They could just stay here. As long as they could hand over Junko, it didn't matter to Shi Heng and the others whether they entered the village or not. Yang Qindong's past experience taught them that it was best not to provoke him unless they felt that they were strong enough. Otherwise, it was better to avoid him. Even if there were some things that couldn't be avoided, it was best not to enter the village. The 3 of them sat at the temporary table without the slightest bit of displeasure. They drank their tea in satisfaction and were even able to reveal the scene of them chatting and laughing. Yang Qindong's face had been maintaining a formulaic smile, but the more it was like this, the more no one dared to look down on him. Even Shi Heng secretly observed him several times. He found that the more contact he had with this person, the more he couldn't see what this person was thinking. It had already been proven that this kind of person was the most terrifying. He couldn't help but think that if Hu Zhongning didn't come with him today, it would be impossible to make him hand over Junko. He couldn't help but feel lucky that he had found such a good helper. In the Yang Family Academy, Junko, who was still in class, was called out by Tiger's Mane. She opened her beautiful eyes, blinking and looking very puzzled, but her heart was like a drum being beaten by a heavy hammer, completely not as calm as she looked on the surface. Kimura, Yoshida, and Ikegami were dead, killed by her. Although there was no movement afterward, Junko had always been worried about being suspected. After all, she was the person who went to the basement and knew the existence of these two people. She didn't know whether Yang Qindong had told others who was in the basement. If he did, it would be better. At least everyone would be suspected. However, if he was the only one who was told, then there was really no way to escape from it. Junko looked innocent. Tiger's mane had to say something, because this was originally the young master's hint. "Miss Junko, please come with me. There are many people outside the village saying that they're looking for you and that you have another identity." After saying this, Tiger's mane didn't look at Junko at all. From a certain point of view, he had already determined that there was something unusual between her and the young master. So she was an existence that he absolutely couldn't offend. Tiger's mane then turned around and took the lead to leave, leaving Junko as if she was struck by lightning. Another identity? In fact, she should have thought about it. Her existence was not a secret in the upper class of Japan. Even if Kimura, Yoshida, and Ikegami knew about her, then it was inevitable that others would also know about her. So how could killing two people solve the problem? Now they came to find her, so what should she do? When the war between the great Ming dynasty and Japan began, her existence was originally a very good target to be used. Even if she was the leader, such a person would certainly not be let go. "Well, Miss Junko, why don't you go? Are you not feeling well?" After a few steps, Tiger's mane found that there was no one behind him, so he turned around and asked with concern, "I'm not feeling well." It seemed that she was reminded by Tiger's mane, or maybe it was a targeted hint. Junko suddenly covered her stomach and said, I don't know what's going on. My stomach hurts." "Hurts? Is it serious? I'll immediately find a doctor for you." Tiger's mane's face was nervous, but his eyes were actually filled with appreciation. This woman was not stupid. At least she knew what was called a donkey going down a slope. Outside Yang village, after about the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, Tiger's mane came out again. Shi Hung and the others immediately noticed that when this person appeared, there was no one else around him. For a moment, they couldn't help but look at Yang Qindong doubtfully. Their eyes seemed to be questioning him. In this regard, Yang Qindong was too lazy to look at them. He still sat there and casually drank tea, completely ignoring the three people's 6 eyes. Hu Zhongning was his father-in-law. He would respect him, and he must respect him. But this did not mean that he had to unconditionally retreat in the face of anything. This time, allowing the 3 people to sit here and drink tea was already giving enough face. At least if they wanted to ask him for help, that was a fool's dream. Chapter 290. Obviously, Tiger's mane understood the meaning of Yang Qindong and walked out alone. After a while, under the doubtful eyes of several people, Tiger's mane came to Yang Qindong's side and said in a voice that everyone could hear, "Young master, Miss Junko is sick, and the doctor is treating her." How can it be so coincidental? Before Yang Qindong could say anything, Ru Zhu, who heard it, already stood up with a look of disbelief. Looking at him, he almost reached out and accused Yang Qindong of lying. "What do you mean by coincidental? Sick is sick? Is it possible that this is also fake?" Dealing with a eunuch, although this person's status in the eunuch group was not low, but after Yang Qindong showed his fangs in a timely manner, there were few people who could put him in his eyes. Therefore, to deal with Ru Zhu, there was no need for him to say anything. Tiger's mane on the side took over the words and asked with an unhappy face. Tiger's mane often appeared around Yang Qindong, but those who knew Duke of Loyalty naturally knew about this servant. Seeing that a servant dared to talk to him like this, Ru Zhu felt great shame. "Who do you think you are? With your identity, you dare to talk to me like this? What is his identity? My brother? You, on the other hand, aren't even considered a normal person. Who allowed you to strut around here? Yang Qindong, whose expression was as usual and whose gaze was calm, suddenly raised his head and stared at Ru Zhu with a questioning tone. The status of eunuchs in the Ming dynasty was so high that few other dynasties could compare with it. Even in a certain period of time, the strength of the eunuch group was second only to the emperor and much higher than the ministers. This also made some people arrogant and felt superior to others. But now, someone pointed out their biggest weakness, that is, the incompleteness of their body. How could Ru Zhu's face look good? Duke of Loyalty? What do you mean by this? Are you looking down on this eunuch? Okay, you can say that to others, but don't brag in front of this duke. Yang Qindong looked at Ru Zhai, who was like a red-eyed rooster. Yang Qindong didn't pay any more attention to him. Instead, he looked at Hu Zhongning and said, "Father-in-law, Miss Junko is sick. Naturally, she can't come out to meet guests. And this person is just an ordinary businessman in Japan. The so-called princess identity is simply nonsense. I think this is simply a lie before Aoki Yuki's death to make us have internal discord. So we don't fall into his trap. Let's just leave this matter. Let's leave this matter as it is." It seemed very casual talk, but in fact, this matter was the matter. That was, Yang Qindong didn't believe that Junko was the princess of Japan. Whether other people believed it or not, they should treat it as if they didn't believe it. Okay, since Duke of Loyalty said so, this old man will naturally believe it. Hu Zhongning, of course, knew where to turn. This time, he came personally to give face to Shi Hong. As for whether this matter would succeed or not, it was not something he should worry about. Hu Zhongning got up and looked like he was about to leave. Ru Zhu looked at the side and gritted his teeth. This was clearly Yang Qindong and Hu Zhongning in cahoots. He could only look at Shi Hong and said, "Wokinghao, you see? Fine. Since Duke of Loyalty is the guarantor, then Marquis will naturally believe it. Sorry to bother you this time." Shi Hong was a smart person. After knowing that this matter was impossible, he immediately backed down. One was the famous Duke of Loyalty. The other was the eldest son of the minister of the Ministry of Rights, who served several emperors. Which one of them was easy to deal with? Now, his main task was to prepare troops to support the Tianjin garrison. As long as this battle was won, it would establish his position and strength in the army. At that time, if there was a chance, he would have some strength to compete with Yang Qindong. So what if he backed down now? What's more, if this Miss Junko was really a princess of Japan, it would be a good thing to let her stay by Yang Qindong's side. She would be a cannon that would explode sooner or later. Shi Hong had his own thoughts, so he went along with the conversation. Ru Zhu knew that it was impossible for him to get anything out of this. But today he hit a wall here, so he remembered this grievance in his heart. One day, he would definitely return it. At that time, he would let Yang Qindong know that a eunuch like him could not be offended. Everyone left. Originally, they wanted to take Junko away, but because Yang Qindong acted shamelessly, they did not even see her. It seemed that the thunder was big, but the rain was small. But that was not the case. The words Shi Hong said when he left were actually a trap set by the sixth young master. The words Duke of Loyalty had already damaged the relationship between Yang Qindong and Junko. If this person was really a princess of Japan, then he would have to bear all the consequences. This seemingly unintentional sentence was, in fact, a sharp blade was hidden in it. If it were someone else, they would naturally be worried at this moment. But in Yang Qindong's eyes, this was not a problem at all. The reason why Shi Hong did not make things difficult for him now was that he wanted to wait until he was stronger. But he did not know that as time passed, the expansion of the Yangtze's new army was much faster than the growth of the Ming dynasty's army. In other words, the longer the time passed, the bigger the gap between the two sides would be. At that time, how could Yang Qindong be afraid of Shi Hong? Not to mention, there was already a chance to deal with him. Inform Regiment Commander Gao to make preparations in the Tianjin garrison. We must serve our commander-in-chief comfortably. Tiger's Mane certainly understood what comfortably meant. Although Shi Hung seemed to give Yang Qindong a lot of face on the surface, it was just an act. He wanted the Duke of Loyalty to ignore his existence and development. If he really wanted to give face, then he should not have brought people here today. He should have just sent someone to ask and go through the motions. But he did not do that. Instead, he brought a lot of people here, which already proved that he regarded Yang Qindong as his opponent. More importantly, both sides relied on the military. Even so, how could they get along with each other in harmony? With his shameless methods, Shi Hung naturally could not complete the fact that he had an extra bargaining chip in his hand. But he was not discouraged, or it could be said that he did not have much hope in the matter of Junko. In his view, when two armies confronted each other, it was a competition of strength. This included military strength, financial strength, and national conditions. And these Ming dynasty warriors should be much stronger than the Japanese samurai. Even so, what was there to be afraid of? He only needed to fight steadily. Once he reached a stalemate with the Japanese army, the final victory would belong to him. So after returning to the capital, Shi Hung did not show any displeasure. He still followed the previous plan to prepare provisions, uniforms, and weapons for the 50,000 soldiers who were about to set out. While Shi Hung was making all the preparations, Gao Xiong was also making preparations at the Tianjin garrison port. Today was the day Shi Hung set out with the army from the capital. Gao Xiong also received the order from the 6th young master to serve the commander well. This time, the person who came with Gao Xiong from the sea to Tianjin garrison was Battalion Commander Niatong. In the temporary command center, there was a huge sand table which showed the complete topography of the nearby area. It was easier to see the situation and make better military decisions. The sand table showed that the distance from the capital to Tianjin garrison was less than 300 li. In other words, if the army was fast enough, they could reach here in just one day. Of course, the roads in the Ming dynasty were not developed. It was very difficult for 50,000 soldiers, and most of them were infantry, to travel 300 li in one day. Even elite soldiers could not do it. But Gao Xiong still made arrangements and called several battalion commanders and company commanders to discuss countermeasures. The Yangtze New Army had a good tradition. Before the battle plan was decided, everyone had the right to make suggestions. But once the plan was decided, no one could have any other doubts. There was only one thing to do, and that was to carry out the plan with all their strength. Today, as usual, everyone put forward their own suggestions. Led by Battalion Commander Niatong and 2 company commanders, they suggested to set up an ambush in the Langfang between the capital and Tianjin garrison. They would first give the enemy a heavy blow and break their morale. The Langfang was only 40 li away from the capital and 60 li away from Tianjin garrison. It was closely connected to the 2 places, giving it a unique position. It was also a place that one had to pass through to reach Tianjin garrison from the capital. Niatong and the others had chosen this place for the first battle. It could be seen that they had put a lot of thought into it. However, Gao Xiong vetoed this plan. In his words, since everyone could see that the Langfang was such an important place, how could Shi Hung not know? How could he so easily fall into this trap? Since they could not set up an ambush in the Langfang, Niatong asked, "Commander Gao, are we going to fight the Great Ming Army in Tianjin garrison?" The 6th young master said that in order to not reveal our true identities, it is best not to use firearms in this battle. We only have 2,000 people, so how can we be a match for the 50,000 Great Ming Army? Who said we can't win if we don't use firearms? Who said we can only fight them in Tianjin garrison? Have you forgotten the sparrow tactics taught by the 6th young master? Gao Xiong laughed, as if he had a card up his sleeve. Sparrow tactics was a guerrilla tactic commonly used by China's militia to defeat the strong with the weak. Groups formed by the militia would come and go, gather and disperse, and be proactive and flexible. They would appear and disappear mysteriously to attack the enemy. During the War of Resistance against Japan, the militia of the anti-Japanese base would sometimes be in twos or threes, and sometimes in groups. They would appear in the mountains, forests, narrow valleys, tunnels, dark holes, and green gauze tents. Like sparrows pecking at food, they would shoot here and there, catching the enemy off guard and attacking them fiercely. Chapter 291. When the enemy counterattacked, they would immediately retreat and conceal themselves without a trace. When the enemy retreated, they would charge forward with the sound of gunfire, and the sound of killing filled the air. This would cause the enemy to be unable to hit them, unable to chase after them, unable to eat well, unable to sleep soundly, uneasy, and battered. In summary, there were 3 points: ambush, ambush, and obstruct. Sparrow tactics. After hearing this, Nyatong and the other company commanders couldn't help but feel shocked. They instantly thought of the great Ming dynasty's army being split up and thrown around in circles. Yes, it is the sparrow tactics, Gao Xiong said with a decisive tone. Then he pointed at the sand table and continued, "In this battle, we can't use a large amount of firearms. This means that our greatest advantage has been suppressed. If we want to win with a few people, we can only use sneak attacks and harassment. Fortunately, our cold vanguard soldiers are elites. They are all 1 in 100, or even 1 in 1,000. Even the 2,000 auxiliary soldiers accompanying us are slightly stronger than the great Ming dynasty's elites. As long as we adopt the strategy of having the veteran lead the troops, with 1 lung feng leading 5 auxiliary troops, breaking up the whole into smaller groups and harassing them in small groups, we will be able to give the enemy the impression that there are soldiers everywhere. When they are exhausted, we will suddenly gather in one place and launch a large encirclement and annihilation. This battle will be decided." Gao Xiong's expression was serious, but his eyes were filled with excitement. After he finished speaking, he looked at Nyatong and the others and said, "In this battle, we will use our actions to tell the 6th young master and all the soldiers and civilians in Crimson City that we can not only be dragons of the sea, but also tigers of the land. Yes, we're not only dragons of the sea, but also tigers of the land." Nyatong and the others stood solemnly and roared excitedly. Under Gao Xiong's leadership, the strategy was set. Next, it was time to redistribute the soldiers. In order to achieve the effect of having soldiers everywhere, the 400 cold vanguard soldiers were divided into squads. The first squad had 10 people and 50 auxiliary soldiers. This way, each squad had 60 soldiers. This way, they could hide themselves well and launch small-scale attacks. At the same time, they could train their troops. Presumably, after this battle, some of the auxiliary troops would have the opportunity to enter the cold front. There were exactly 4,000 people, divided into 40 small groups. After a day, they disappeared from the Tianjin Guard, hiding in the vast sea of commoners. According to Gao Xiong, this time not only did they want to attack the great Ming dynasty's army, but they also wanted to abduct a large number of people. With the rapid development of Crimson City, it could be said that the city changed every day. If they wanted to maintain this speed, they needed a lot of manpower. Even the elderly and children could be used. Using the sparrow battle tactic, the soldiers infiltrated the commoners and encouraged them to bring more poor people to Crimson City. They would work hard and contribute to the development of the city and their beautiful future. The sparrow tactics began to be implemented. More than 2,000 cold fronts were like leaves blown by a strong wind, disappearing without a trace overnight. However, Commander-in-Chief Shi Hung, who was cautiously rushing to the Tianjin garrison, was unaware of all this. Not only that, but as Gao Xiong expected, the army was moving forward steadily. Originally, it was less than 300 kilometers away. Logically speaking, it would take at most 1.5 days for the army to reach this place. However, 2 days had already passed, and the army was still searching outside Langfang City. Shi Hung believed that if he were in Gao Xiong's shoes, he would definitely set up an ambush here. Therefore, as soon as they entered Langfang City, the army of 50,000 became extremely cautious and searched the villages one by one. They stayed here for 2 days, and it turned out that they did not find any enemies here. Haha, it seems that the Japanese army is afraid. Very good. Order the army to speed up and enter the Tianjin Guard as soon as possible to eliminate these foreign races. The emperor is still waiting for our report of victory. Since they did not encounter any danger in Langfang City, Shi Heng's originally cautious heart became much bolder. He thought that the Japanese army was not familiar with the terrain and did not dare to come out to fight. Therefore, he became bolder and ordered the army to speed up and go straight to their destination, Tianjin Guard. However, as soon as they took a big step, accidents began to appear one after another. Originally, they were prepared to have a good night's rest and go straight to Tianjin Guard tomorrow. However, during the night of camping in the wild, the entire military camp was attacked from all directions. Fire crossbows were used to attack from afar. Short bows were used to attack from close range. In just one night, more than 5,000 Ming soldiers lost their place to rest, and about 2,000 of them suffered different degrees of trauma. According to the final summary of the data, at least 7 or 8 strongholds were attacked. In other words, at least 7 or 8 enemy forces launched a sneak attack on them tonight. How can there be so many? How many people are there in the Japanese army? Looking at the summary of the battle report, Shi Heng's eyebrows had long been knitted together. Because of the darkness, the great Ming dynasty's army couldn't clearly see how many enemies there were. They could only hear bursts of battle cries coming from all directions. The soldiers, who had already become timid because of their excessive caution, began to retreat when they heard the shouts. How could they have the time to see how many enemies there were and what kind of weapons they were holding? Without a specific battle report, Shi Heng could not make an accurate judgment, which also caused him to be unable to find a better solution to the surprise attack in front of him. The only thing he could do was to shrink the army and set up defenses carefully. However, this was a passive defense. Not only did it greatly delay the speed of the march, but it also shook the morale of the army. However, Shi Heng did not have a good solution for these elusive opponents. If he sent a large group of people out to encircle and suppress them, they would not be able to find them at all. It would only be a waste of manpower and resources. If he sent a small group of troops, they often did not return or returned with heavy injuries. A small group of people who were lucky came back and said that the enemy seemed to be everywhere and endless. After staying outside Langfang City for 2 full days, they had been attacked more than 60 times. That was to say, of the 40 small branches under Gao Xiong's command, every single one of them had attacked at least once. More than half of them had attacked at least twice. Under so many attacks, the result was that the Ming army lost nearly 10,000 people. Most of them were injured, and not even 1/10 of them were killed. The battle losses were not small. After all, they had lost 1/5 of their troops without even seeing the enemy. They did not dare to imagine what the result would be if they faced the enemy head-on. Of course, this was because the Ming army was mostly new and had not been on the battlefield and had no experience. However, the most important factor was the flexibility, speed, and stealth of the Sparrow battle. That feeling of being everywhere, yet unable to be touched or found, was extremely annoying. We can't wait here any longer. We need to go to the Tianjin garrison. Pass down the order. The army is to set out. The head and the tail are to line up and set out in a long snake formation. However, if one group is attacked, the other groups do not need to ask for reinforcements. Shi Heng rubbed his dizzy head. His tone was filled with a trace of helplessness and frustration. When his subordinate heard this military order, he asked with a trace of hesitation, "Commander-in-Chief, how should we deal with the injured? Many of them have leg injuries, and I'm afraid that they won't be able to follow the army for a while. They should all stay behind." At the same time, send out a 500-man squad to protect them and send them back to the capital. Shirhung said, a resolute light in his eyes. This was how it was on the battlefield. Once one was injured and could not move freely, one would become a burden. People like this would naturally be abandoned. After the order was given, the army of 50,000 abandoned nearly 10,000 men and set out for the Tianjin garrison several dozen kilometers away. As Shirhung's army was setting out, Battalion Commander Nie Tong led 20 squads to follow. Gao Xiong did not follow. Instead, he led the other squads to the 10,000-some wounded soldiers left behind. In Shirhung's eyes, these wounded Ming soldiers were a burden. But in Lung Feng's eyes, they were treasures. If there was one thing that Crimson City lacked the most, it would be men in their prime. Furthermore, these injured soldiers, who could not move freely for a while, were highly sought after. In order to quickly subdue these injured Ming soldiers, Gao Xiong finally drew his sword. The elite Cold Vanguard soldiers were all equipped with super strong combat abilities. The thousands of auxiliary soldiers who had also undergone strict training suddenly surrounded the Ming soldiers like phantoms. Even though they were outnumbered, a single wave of attacks was enough to subdue the 500-man escort. When the advanced firearms were taken out, the wounded Ming soldiers quickly gave in. One of the reasons for this was because they were afraid of firearms, but it was also because they yearned for mercenaries. Many of them had even thought of learning more about mercenaries and joining them. It was just that they did not have the opportunity to do so. Now that the opportunity had appeared, many of them were secretly delighted. They felt that this was an opportunity bestowed by the heavens. When some of the wounded tried to resist, their weapons were snatched away by the other Ming soldiers. According to these people, this was an opportunity that they could not even ask for. Since it had appeared, how could they reject it? The operation of subduing the wounded soldiers went extremely smoothly, out of Gao Xiong's expectations. At this moment, he finally knew that the 6th young master's work in the capital over the past year had not been in vain. While he was happy, he also cautiously gave the order that not a single Ming soldier could be allowed to leave the group. At the very least, the news of the mercenaries appearing here could not be spread. It seemed impossible for 1,000 people to gather nearly 10,000 wounded soldiers. However, with the help of the wounded soldiers of the Ming army who had a good impression of the mercenaries, the operation went unexpectedly smoothly. Chapter 292. As for Shirhung, when he led the 40,000 troops out of the Langfang and came to the wilderness, he was like a live target being attacked all the time. Short bows were used when they were close, and long bows were used when they were far away. When he sent a limited number of cavalry to chase after them, the other party ran away faster than a rabbit. Shirhung's mouth was filled with blisters due to the tactic of you walk, he disturbs, you stop, he hits, you chase after him. He was really furious, but he didn't have any better ideas. Originally, the army could have covered dozens of kilometers in half a day, but it took more than a day. It was not until the evening of the second day that they arrived at Tianjin Guard. As soon as he entered, the scene he saw made Shirhung feel like he had been played and cheated. There were still Ming soldiers standing guard at the gate of Tianjin Guard, and the people in the city walked as usual in an orderly manner. How was this even the slightest bit like he was being attacked and trying to rescue someone? Shirhung, who couldn't figure out what was going on, immediately sent someone to call the Baihu officer who was guarding the city. Only then did he learn that the Japanese samurai had suddenly disappeared 4 days ago. As for where they went, they didn't know. They had also sent a fast horse to the capital to inform about this matter. However, it was obvious that something had happened to the fast horse. Otherwise, it would have run into Governor Shirhung, who was hurrying over. Ran away? Disappeared? Shirhung did not think about why he did not encounter a fast horse on his way here. He was now thinking about why the Japanese samurai had disappeared. Could it be that they could really fly into the sky and hide in the ground? Did you search the city? Since he had already entered Tianjin Guard and ensured the safety of this place, his mission could be considered a success. Next, he had to consider how to expand the results of the battle. At least he had to catch some Japanese samurai, preferably alive, and bring them back to the capital as prisoners of war. In this way, his position in the army would be more stable. The Baihu officer guarding the city shook his head with some difficulty. In fact, with a number of troops in his hands, he did not dare to do such a thing. He was naturally happy that the Japanese army did not appear. How could he take the initiative to look for them? Trash. Hearing the official's reply, Shi Heng's face was naturally filled with displeasure. Then, as the commander-in-chief, he gave the order to take over the city's defense. He also requested that starting from the next morning, there should be a large-scale manhunt in the city. He did not believe that the Japanese army would withdraw so completely. There must be some people left behind to inquire about the news. As long as they could catch them, it would be a great achievement. Because of Shi Heng's arrival, the Tianjin Guard became even more chaotic. The people in the city, who had just rested for a few days, found that the reinforcements of the great Ming dynasty had rushed into the people's homes like tigers and wolves. They rushed into the shops on the streets, rushed into the mansions, and rushed into the mansions. Speaking of which, these Ming soldiers had been suppressing a bellyful of anger. Along the way, they were constantly ambushed. Now that they finally had a chance to vent their anger, how could they be courteous? Immediately, they would not let go of any suspicious place in the city. Those who were wrongly arrested filled up the entire prison cell. This, naturally, caused the people's hearts to be in chaos. The elderly and children were bullied, women were bullied, and adult men were wrongly arrested as spies. It was not uncommon for them to be wrongly arrested. The atmosphere in the city was foul and chaotic. These Ming soldiers had just joined not long ago and had not undergone systematic training. Even in terms of military discipline, their self-discipline was extremely poor. Now, they could openly do some things that they did not dare to do before. It was like a competition to see who could snatch more women, who could bully people better, and who could extort more money. Most of them were sent to Commander-in-Chief Shi Heng. As the general in charge of the army, his subordinates would naturally give him a lot of benefits. Looking at the silver tails that were quickly piled up like a mountain, Shi Heng, who originally wanted to restrain his subordinates, simply shut his mouth. If he wanted the soldiers to work for him, he had to give them benefits. As long as they were obedient and obeyed his orders, he could just turn a blind eye to some small mistakes. After a large-scale search, they really did find something. Some of the Japanese descendants who originally lived here were captured and then treated as spies for the Japanese army. They were tortured, and in the end, they would say whatever you wanted them to say. These real Japanese, people who had gone into hiding when the Tianjin garrison was attacked by the so-called Japanese army, became scapegoats at this moment. In the end, more than 300 people were captured, and their case files were pushed to Shi Heng. With this harvest, Shi Heng's expression finally improved. Thinking that the emperor was probably waiting for good news in the capital, he personally wrote a letter and wrote down his harvest. For example, on the way from the capital, he had fought dozens of battles with the Japanese army. In the end, he had successfully killed more than 10,000 people and captured more than 300, but his own army had also lost more than 10,000 people. The written battle report, which could also be said to be a request for merit, was quickly sent to the capital by horse. He continued to abuse his power in the Tianjin garrison, waiting for the emperor's reward. Then he would find a suitable time to return to the capital as a meritorious official. Although the Japanese army had not been found, the silence of the past few days had given Shi Heng the idea that all the enemies had fled. Moreover, he was defending the city this time, so he was not afraid of a small group of enemy sneak attacks. Presumably, there was no chance. These Japanese soldiers who had problems with food and shelter should have retreated to the sea. After all, they had come from afar. and without sufficient supplies, they could not stay in a foreign country for too long. In order to allow the Japanese troops to retreat, Shi Hung even intentionally ignored the defensive line at the port outside the city. He only sent less than 100 Ming soldiers there and ordered that once the Japanese troops appeared, they were not to fight them head-on, but to retreat. They only needed to watch from afar and report back what happened. On the second night after Shi Hung entered the Tianjin garrison, the Japanese army really did appear. It was impossible to hide their vast army, and they were discovered the moment they appeared. The 100 Ming soldiers were extremely obedient and quickly withdrew. They watched as more than 10,000 people entered the harbor and then left on ships that had appeared at some point. When Shi Hung learned that the Japanese army had retreated, he was naturally overjoyed. Although the process of this battle was difficult and complicated, so much so that he didn't really manage to eliminate the enemy once from the beginning to the end, the result was good. Their army retreated, and his mission could be considered completed. He could finally report to the emperor. Full of joy, Shi Hung immediately had someone write a report of the victory. He wanted to tell the emperor and the officials in the court the good news as soon as possible. At the same time, he wanted to take this opportunity to publicize his achievements and take advantage of the opportunity to obtain some benefits. In the Great Ming, the Loyalty Guild was not the only one who fought. Shi Hung could also do the same. Then he sent out soldiers to take the more than 300 real Japanese people who were stationed in the Great Ming dynasty in prison wagons, and then 1,000 soldiers marched back to the capital. According to Shi Hung's intention, everywhere he went, he had to announce it with great fanfare, as if he was afraid that others would not know what he had done. The report of the victory was sent in advance. Without Gao Xiong stopping it, the road was smooth. In just one night, the news reached the capital. When Zhu Qiyu, the emperor in the imperial palace, heard the news, he was naturally overjoyed and applauded. This time, Shi Hung had defeated the Japanese army. The significance of this was not as simple as winning a battle. More importantly, through this battle, as the emperor, he had also gained a reputation for being able to recognize people and use them well. This greatly stabilized his position as the emperor, and it also greatly weakened the influence of the loyalty duke in the military and in the hearts of the people. If one day he stabilized everything, he would not have so many concerns when he wanted to take action against the meritorious officials. After the officials heard the news, they were both happy and sad. Naturally, those who were happy were those who supported the emperor and those who were on good terms with Shi Hung. It had been like this for generations. Only when the military was stabilized, other things could be done easily. Only then would they have the confidence to do things and be able to do better. There were not many officials who were sad, only a few. For example, the Minister of Rights, Hu Chang, the Left Assistant Minister, He Wen-yuan, the Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji, and the Left Assistant Minister of Justice, Su Yozhen. They were either openly or inwardly on Yang Qindong's side. Originally, they thought that the naval invasion of the Japanese army would not be so easy to solve. In the end, they would even need the loyalty duke to come forward. But now, Shi Hung had been captured so easily. In this case, Yang Qindong's influence would be greatly weakened. Even when they wanted to take action against this person in the future, they would have fewer concerns. Yang Qindong did nothing. After defeating Walla, he handed over all his military power and stayed in the Yang family manor, teaching and educating people. He rarely came to the capital, but his influence in the military and in the hearts of the people had always been great. The name of the god of war was well known throughout Qianletong. It seemed that as long as he took action, there was nothing that could not be solved. Now that there was a substitute, it was no wonder that those who cared about him were so anxious. In contrast to the worries of others, Yang Qindong was much calmer. Even when he heard the news from Shi Hung, his expression remained the same. He stood in the room in the main hall and watched Hu Yan, Qiao Yin, Lady Xiang, and seventh sister play mahjong. The immortal abode still had many programs to arrange. Lady Shui remained there, and seventh sister, Yonduo took her place. Even if seventh sister did not come out as a substitute, there were still backup players. For example, Junko. Even though there were enough people, she still sat obediently to the side. From time to time, she would pour tea and water for everyone, appearing very obedient. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.